He had an upstairs rented. Well, then he went to get a permit for the apartment, so you can't do that, that's commercial, you're single family. They started, then he ended up suing them, and then they dropped everything.
Yeah. By saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, thank you. In accordance with the Article 12, Section 12.05 of the Kent City Charter, notice was here given that Kent City Council would be conducting a public hearing to examine the input of political influence resulting from campaign contributions by corporate entities on the city, the state, and the nation. For those speaking today, we ask that you check in with the clerk. She will call your name. Please come to the podium and clearly state your name and address, and limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. If possible, either email your concerns or hand a hard copy to the clerk Wilkins, or leave it with her tonight. One of the two, one of the three. So, who's first, Amy?
Mr. Lee Brooker.
Give your name and address, and we'll give you 5 minutes.
Hi, I'm Lee Brooker at 814 Hudson Road, Kent. And just want to thank Council for the 7th time, I believe, holding a discussion, a hearing about the problem of big money influence in elections primarily. And I think more importantly, the opportunity for the city to officially remind Congress that in 2015 the voters of Kent voted in favor of a constitutional amendment saying that corporations are not people and that money is not speech. And so what we do is remind Congress of that vote in 2015 each time we hold one of these hearings, and provide the minutes to Congress at all levels of Congress. So thank you so much for doing this, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further, Amy?
Ms. Mary Jane Stone.
Same thing, name and address for the record, and we'll give you 5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Mary Jane Stone, and I live at 133 Brady Street. And the reason I am here tonight is to speak to humans, about humans, and for other living beings. And what I want to tell you guys is that we have a problem with light pollution, and light pollution is a solvable environmental crisis, luckily solvable. And let me just define what light pollution is. It's the inappropriate or excessive use of artificial light, resulting in glare, sky glow, and light trespass. The U.S. spends approximately $3.3 billion a year on unnecessary lighting. That's a lot of money. And therefore, it's releasing about 21 million tons of CO2 on unnecessary lighting. And that equals that we would have to plant 875 million trees a year to offset that CO2 emissions. Lighting in the blue spectrum interrupts our circadian rhythm and our hormones. And right now, we have created this crisis with the LED lighting, which is great because we want to lower the heat of the lighting, but the blue lighting is causing these health problems for people. Exposure puts humans at risk for cancer and other deadly diseases like diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, just to name a few. Overlighting is detrimental to plant and animal life as well. It disrupts hunting and feeding, migration and nesting, and our pollinators. It basically is equaling species die-off, and that is a really big concern for every living creature, including humans. In addition, millions of birds die yearly by flying into needlessly illuminated buildings. And I was walking downtown Kent the other day, and I found a northern flicker on the sidewalk in front of the Amtech building or whatever. And it was really sad and hard to see that. You know, they're beautiful birds. They're quite big. and I feel like we need to pay attention to that. And finally, brighter does not equal safer, okay? We need to be smarter lighting, not brighter lighting. And as an aside, I just want to point out that 80% of Americans cannot see the Milky Way, and many of our younger citizens have never seen it. And so, winding up here, I just want to point out to the powers that be, the money, the people who have the money, the politicians, the corporations, that changes made now will last us for 20 years. So we really need to choose the correct lighting. And so I'm asking for everybody to consider choosing PC amber lighting. So we want to go the 3000 K lighting, which is in the red zone as compared to the blue zone. We should be looking at dimmable lighting, which LEDs are really great at. Time and motion sensors, and to use shields. And that is all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Further name?
Greg Coleridge.
Name and address for the record, and we'll give you 5 minutes to hear your concern.
Hold it.
Yeah, if you want to hold it, go ahead and hold it.
Yeah, probably the only way to get it this low. Sorry. Greg Coleridge, 3016 Somerton Road in Cleveland Heights, 44118. I'm the co-director of the National Move to Amend campaign. There's a Chinese proverb that says, unless we change direction, we are likely to end up where we are going. If we're honest with ourselves about the direction of what little democracy we have, which truthfully was never as much as it should have been from day one in this country, then where we're headed is a monocracy, plutocracy, and corpocracy, not to mention an autocracy, all rolled into one. There's no single cause for this, but major factors are the more than century-long series of bizarre Supreme Court decisions anointing corporations with constitutional rights, corporate personhood some call it, and decades-long series of bizarre Supreme Court decisions anointing money in elections as equal to First Amendment-protected free speech. Abolishing corporate constitutional rights and money as speech are the two central components of H.J.R. 48, the We the People Amendment, now supported by 95 U.S. representatives, including Tim Ryan, more than 650 organizations nationwide, and over 700 communities that enacted either a municipal resolution or passed, like Kent, a citizen-driven ballot initiative. The leadership of this national effort has come from the bottom up, from people like Bill Weiland, Lee Brooker, and others here in Kent who educated, advocated, and organized for passing the initiative calling on Congress to pass H.J.R. 48. But people like you, elected officials, both individually and collectively, have an extremely important role, if you so choose, to complement this effort. Here are 6 actions you can take to move this movement forward. 1, publicly call out any pay-to-play, quote-unquote, instances in which, for example, developers or others who want something in Kent donate, or more accurately, invest in political campaigns of one or more councilpersons just before or after they receive what they want. 2, don't be intimidated to pass ordinances that protect the health, safety, and welfare of Kent residents by corporate threats that they will preempt the law by going to the state legislature or to court, claiming that their corporate constitutional so-called rights have been violated. 3, encourage council colleagues you know in Ravenna and or other communities in Portage County and beyond to join the hundreds of other communities that have passed resolutions calling for abolishing money as free speech and corporate constitutional rights. Sample resolutions in support of the We the People Amendment are at movetoamend.org/pass-. resolution. 4, introduce a resolution supporting passage of HJR 48 to your county political party. Many county political parties and state ones around the country have done so. 5, if Tim Ryan wins his race for Senate, pass a resolution encouraging him to introduce HJR in the U.S. Senate, since he's already co-sponsored the measure in the House. And finally, 6, personally, don't accept large individual contributions or corporate PAC funds for your political campaigns. I realize that under the current political reality, it takes an increasing amount of money to run, and the threat of so-called independent funding from super PACs and dark money groups is real. But commit to working at collecting smaller donations from more individuals as much as you can, while at the same time calling for passage of HJR 48. I conclude, it's time to abolish the corrupting influence of big money in politics, which is legalized bribery and corporate rule. It's a major way to change direction before we end up where we are headed. Feel free to contact me. My email address is greg@movetomen.org for any questions or ways that I might be able to assist any of you individually or Kent City Council collectively. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Did you send a hard copy of that to the clerk or email?
Yeah, I have one right here.
Okay, we appreciate it. Further, Amy?
Oh, that's all.
That's it? All right, we definitely appreciate you coming tonight, and we'll send our letter off as we always do, and hopefully there might be an answer coming back. So at this time, I'm going to adjourn the public hearing, Democracy Day. Border Control.
That's right. I gotta get over there.
I was daydreaming. I was going to tell that lady she might want to stay for some of the climate action stuff.
This agenda,
That's all
we're
right.
going to be here until midnight.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Did you notice? It was like we didn't see it.
All right. Let me get to the back of the packet.
Yeah, that was a short
Here, it's usually right at the end.
Maybe it'll just dissolve.
We got minutes.
Why is this guy coming?
Of September 21, right?
Yep, September 21. So,
I recommend,
any discussion on the minutes? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Minutes carry. And then tonight, it just looks like 2. Is that right? Am I reading it right?
2.
It's interesting.
Move to authorize.
Any discussion on either? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
People were private.
I know, right? For that, 2 little items.
It'll take you a year to get MRIs.
Well, that's unfortunate,
Yeah.
but I know people
Thompson
that
Electric.
go to Canada to get help.
The October 5th, 2022, regular council meeting. Mr. Kuhar.
Here.
I know you're here. They changed the agenda, if you read it, and then you're up.
Yeah. Oh, I am. Okay, I believe Bridget has something that she wants to share with us on that.
Bring the popcorn.
What popcorn? Okay, I don't see anything about popcorn. Design guidelines. There you go.
So as you may remember, in July, we had an open public session as well as a work session with council to discuss the updates to the design guidelines. Unfortunately, we did not proceed very far. We got through, I think, 1.5 slides. So we have asked Alyssa and Chris to come back and present. They have actually have the luxury of having the information from that public session in the interviews this time. So the presentation is a larger slide deck, so I would appreciate if we can get through it and then have questions. That way then we can make sure that everything is covered before we open it up to everyone. Your questions may be answered through the deck. So at this time, I'm going to turn over to the consultants, and we will engage in discussion.
I think I want to move out there.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow it on. Yeah, we need a new city.
There we go.
And we have the same slides or not?
Yeah, these are the same.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so since I will have to move the slides, I'll stand over here if that's okay?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So good evening, and thank you so much for having us back this evening. Chris Hopkins and I are here from CT Consultants, and we are before you again this evening to continue our discussions about updating the design guidelines that govern the downtown and the West River Overlay District. As Bridget alluded to, my presentation is somewhat lengthy, so if you could possibly just hold your questions and comments until we get to the end. Because it is a lengthy presentation, if there's a particular slide that you're concerned about, perhaps jot that down and we can come back to it if we need to. So the process for this update includes 3 phases. We are currently in phase 1, which is our information gathering phase. At the end of this phase, we will produce our recommendations report, and that report will outline our recommendations in terms of changes to the design guidelines. And once that report has been vetted by the city, we will move on to phase 2. In phase 2, we will actually draft a copy of these standards and guidelines. And then in phase 3, we will provide a document to the city that is adoptable. So what is urban design? After we reviewed your existing design guidelines and talked to you in July and talked to the community members and looked at the minutes from the ARB, we really did come to realize that your existing focus really is on individual buildings instead of on the public realm. So what we're proposing to you this evening is really to reframe our focus and really to focus on urban design instead of those individual buildings and parts of the buildings. We're proposing fundamentally a paradigm shift to think about urban design and the public realm. So urban design really isn't just architecture writ large. Urban design affects and is ultimately affected by building architecture, but it really isn't just a bunch of buildings. What it is the design of the public realm, which is affected by the relationship among buildings. So urban design is the art, I'm just going to read this to you, the art of designing the public environment of the city, including the interface between private properties and the public environment. And really and truly, it's that word interface that we need to focus on. So the public realm, as I've just said, is really comprised of more than just individual buildings. Taken together, these individual buildings and the right-of-way create the public realm. Paying special attention to how buildings interface with the public right-of-way creates a public realm that community members want to spend time in, that they want to explore, that they don't just walk through as they're getting to their destination. So ultimately, we have to think carefully about the relationships of all the parts of a building and of how those parts of the buildings interface with the public right-of-way. In downtown areas, the single largest part of the public realm is the street. It's the street, the on-street parking, the street trees, the sidewalks, and the building facades. And it is the interplay of all of these elements that comprise the public realm. So let's talk a little bit more about this interface between the public and the private. We know that people really do prefer enclosed spaces, like the space created by the buildings when they touch each other and the sidewalk. And these buildings create that street wall that encloses the space and defines what we refer to as an outdoor room. The public realm in downtown is simply an outdoor room that is defined by those building edges. In order for people to stroll in this outdoor room, they have to feel comfortable and it has to be activated. Activation can happen in many different ways, but one of the most important ones is that the people inside the buildings can look out and the people who are walking by on the sidewalk can look in. We're providing a view into the room. So let's shift gears for just a moment and think about goals for the existing design guidelines. And do these existing goals really support this paradigm shift from thinking about the design of individual buildings to the design of the public realm. Oops. So as Bridget alluded to, today we actually have some information from what our public meeting was in July. And so what you see up on the screen is one of our posters. And we listed all of the existing goals, and we asked people to tell us whether they agreed or they disagreed. And as we were standing there talking to people, we realized that it wasn't such a black and white decision. And so my coworker, Chris, brilliantly wrote in, this gray area in the middle, this unsure zone. And what you will see is that by and large, people really did agree with most everything, except for number 2. And that's the one that caused both the most consternation about the gray area and actually had people say they disagreed. And when we talked to people, we found that what they disagreed with, what they had concern with, and some people did say disagree was too strong of a word, but the thing that they had concerned about was this idea of a cohesive identity, because it really does connote that there's a unified, consistent look to downtown. And what we heard people say was that it's pretty much a built-out environment that really isn't cohesive. And so that was the one place where there was just a little bit of concern among the people that we talked to. So, does this emphasis on the public realm force us to think about changing these goals? And understanding that many people agreed with most of them, we have to think carefully about that. Perhaps the existing goals can be supplemented with design principles like the ones that you see on the screen. Things that prioritize a pleasant, rich, and diverse pedestrian experience. That's what we're talking about, having a pedestrian realm that creates that wonderful pedestrian experience. And as we are thinking about these goals and these design principles, let's see what the community members had to say back in July about what buildings in downtown say to them, this is Kent. Now, we asked people to put one dot on a place or building that said this is Kent to them. And truthfully, we think they put more than one. But that's okay. Because it's informative to us to see what people said. On this poster, participants chose the former train depot. They chose Hometown Plaza. They chose Acorn Alley, Acorn Corner, the Venice, and the Kent Stage. On this poster, participants picked out the Old Mill, Ray's, the Loft, among others. And so it seemed to us that the attendance to this meeting in July really were both picking iconic places in Kent, but also places that were special to them, for whatever reason. And these pics show that taken together, these buildings create a definite sense of place that says this is Kent. So we propose, given what we heard about the goals and what people viewed as this is Kent to them, that perhaps that we slightly modify one of the goals. And we say that perhaps it should be that we enshrine the importance of creating and maintaining this sense of place that people have, this thing that caused them to put more than one dot. And again, we don't have to make these decisions tonight, but we're planting the seed that perhaps we have to start thinking this way. So, if we are thinking about creating a sense of place by shifting to this paradigm focus on the public realm instead of individual buildings, where does this paradigm shift lead us? As Paul Goldberg states, urbanism works when it creates a journey as desirable as the destination. We have to use these updated design guidelines and standards to create a desirable journey so that folks discover something new every time they are downtown instead of just going to their destination and leaving. All right, so let's turn our conversation to something a little more concrete. We have prepared some examples of standards and guidelines. And we heard you back in July very clearly that if we start talking about guidelines, remember that those guidelines have to have guardrails. And I don't remember which one of y'all said that, but I thought it was actually a really apt way to talk about one of the things we needed to think about as we were thinking about guidelines in contrast to standards. As you may recall from our discussions in July, standards are objective and mandatory, and guidelines guide the conversation, but they aren't mandatory. So what topics are typically governed by standards and guidelines when we are dealing with a design review district as opposed to a historic district? Typically, it is building placement, mass and scale, pedestrian-oriented design, building materials, lighting, and signs. And as I said, we've prepared some concrete examples to show you where we think we may be headed. Again, we're still in phase one. And if we're off base, this is your time for us to tell us. But this is where we think we may be going based on what we heard back in July. So we think it's the best practice to have an intent that fully explains the standards and the guidelines. We think the standards are important to really give that concrete advice, that concrete mandate. And then we think the guidelines are important to just guide both the developer, the community, and whomever ultimately reviews. So in this case, we're looking at uses. Remember, uses are important to activating the space, and that's what that intent says. The standard is black and white. 30 feet deep on the first floor has to have an occupied space. So what's an occupied space? It's a space in a building that the users of the building regularly use. So in other words, it's creating that place where users are looking out and people can look in, as opposed to a blank wall, as opposed to a screen, as opposed to storage area. So the discrete standard would be the first 30 feet has to be occupied space. But then we give some guidelines. We start talking about we need as much commercial frontage as possible, that the design should require shoppers, that we don't really like lobbies and malls that require people to walk in as opposed to really having that frontage on the street. So again, these are examples, but this is where we think we're going. So building placement, as we talked about earlier, building placement is key because it forms that street wall, the outer edge of the outdoor room. So you will see on the screen a possible intent and your existing zoning standard. So because your existing zoning standard is a little bit nebulous, a potential standard might be that 90% of the front lot line has to be occupied by a building. That would take the place, for example, of your current standard that says the buildings should touch each other where possible. And then also we provide guidelines that talk a little bit more about the enhanced commercial setback that we see on the screen. And again, these are all examples. So transparency is another key to activating the public realm, as we've talked about. Notice on this slide that the picture on the bottom, there isn't any transparency. So these standards would then be addressing things like that if this building, for example, was redeveloped. So in this particular case, we say the standard is 70% of the first floor has to have transparent, clear glazing and no highly reflective glass. And then we provide guidelines that further guide the conversation about how to incorporate transparent glazing. So building materials. Back in July, y'all, we had a little conversation about building materials, so this is why one of our examples is out there. So based on that conversation, we thought it was important to have certain materials that are prohibited. And then we also had a conversation a little bit about if you don't prohibit everything, what is your standard going to be? And so we added this idea potentially of having durable and appropriate building materials for pedestrian context. And then again, we have guidelines that talk about how to appropriately use the building materials on the exterior facade. So next steps. We're finally coming to the end of this very long conversation, very long presentation. So after tonight, we anticipate preparing that Phase 1 recommendations report and getting that to you and concluding Phase 1. So discussion. So two key things to think about, in addition to whatever you may have written down. What do you think about this proposed paradigm shift to thinking about urban design and the public realm? And did you find the examples helpful? Thank you.
Have any questions?
Yeah, well, I want to say I did find this helpful. I think it helped us to conceive of things in a different way versus thinking about, like you said, individual buildings. Oh, we want this building to match the look of every other building versus let's look and see how it uses space and enhances pedestrian access and the experience, kind of that feeling of sense of place, which may be a little more difficult for newer buildings to do, because everybody seemed to love the older buildings, but the question I have for you really has to do with transparency in the building. So we saw that example of what's currently Huntington Bank and how it just looks like a fortress. But I'm also thinking of situations where property owners decide to put offices on the first floor. You can't really look in and see people working, and what would be the point anyways? Is that a good use of space? And the other question I had was, would you please define arcade for me? I'm not really sure what that means.
Sure. So the issue of offices on the first floor. So it's actually a little more complicated, and that places handle it different ways. So there are some places, and if this gets a little too technical, just sort of wave at me, who will say at certain intersections, you have to have something besides office. We think it's so important that we have to have retail or some sort of use in those locations that really does cause people to come in and out all day long. Other communities, and this is actually much more relevant post-COVID, are saying we really don't want to constrain ourselves by saying you have to have retail or some sort of retail-like use in certain locations, because all of that's a little more touchy after COVID. So they are saying, whether it's office or something else, that you really do just have to keep those windows transparent, because believe it or not, people, if it's right there next to them, they're going to want to look in and see what's on your desk and see if your kids' pictures are there and see what kind of monitor you have and all of those things. And so there really is that interplay between the person who's walking in the outdoor room and the person who's working at their desk. But again, if we're in a situation where we have streets that are so important that we want that retail use, we can think about that. Some people will do them A streets and B streets, and some people will not care. And that's a policy choice we can get to as we move further on. But again, if there are side streets that we don't even think it's really important to have that much transparency, we can have different standards there, as opposed to say, between X and Y on Water Street and between X and Y on Main Street, we have to have these transparencies. The wonderful thing about these standards and guidelines is that we can tailor them to you, to Kent. So your second question, I'm sorry, what was your second question? Oh, what's an arcade?
Arcade.
So an arcade would be where you have and this is much more prevalent in other parts of the country, where you have the storefronts are set back from the second floor, and you walk by under a covered area. And also think about in Europe, where they have some of those covered arcades that are between buildings. Like in Europe, instead of having Acorn Alley be open, they would have put a ceiling over that, and that would have been defined as an arcade. Does that help?
Okay. So let me just ask one example. So a bank that has offices on the outside where you can see people working, but you still have public access and you can see through to like the counters and all that. That would be something that would be considered more transparent, kind of a blended use of a service
Mhm.
that people can come in and out of, and also see there's activity going on.
Right. I mean, I think, like I said, we need to seriously think about from a policy level where you want retail experiences and where, if you even think that's necessary. You may say to me, it's not. All we want is a transparency, and we don't care whether or not it's retail or it's retail experience or retail-like. But yes, I mean, I 100% agree. If you have people coming and going, whether it's a bank, some places are even putting childcare facilities in their downtown because people are coming and going with their kids. And oh, I need X on the way into Little Johnny. If you do those kinds of things, then sometimes you do have to think, let's just be honest about it, do we really want windows that are showing children playing on the inside? So that's where we have to start thinking about what streets are most important and then start tailoring uses even to that way. Like we may decide that we want uses on certain side streets, but we would, like a day, but you may not want them on Waddy because we do all have to understand that there are some privacy concerns if it's a daycare or a medical office or some of those things.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Go ahead, did you have?
Not right now, but I think Garrett does.
Garrett?
So how do you deal with theory and reality? So let's say we create this standard that says we'd like to have transparency, but there's not a huge demand for office space to or companies to relocate to downtown Kent, Ohio, and we don't have the space for it either. So so you create these guidelines and standards, but then somebody comes in and says, hey, we'd love to come to Kent, and they've got 100 employees, and it's a great payroll, it's a great tax base, but we don't want to do that. So are we going to turn that away because it doesn't fit our guidelines? And then if we give them an easement or a pass on whatever it may be, then what are you subsequently setting up for future people that want to come in? And now you've compromised what you've established. So how do you deal with, or you're compromising the standards which you want to live by? How do you deal with that?
So that's what I said. I mean, we have to think tactically and strategically about where that transparency, let's just use that example, is key to you. And if it's really key to you, then you don't necessarily compromise. But one of the things that we know is an issue here is appeals, right? So what I think we will end up proposing as well is that whomever ends up reviewing these things, whether it's the ARB or whatever, that they are allowed to give modifications, either because of the use or because of an existing building. But we have to think, is Water Street so key that we aren't willing to allow a modification there, for example, for transparency or whatever it is? So yes, we are very understanding that we have to deal with the realities of theory and practice. The pointy-handed planner in me would like not to, but we know that you have to. But I do think we have to think very strategically about, is there an intersection or a street section where we are unwilling, because creating that sense of place is so important that we're unwilling to make a modification, for example.
I just want to point something out. So Garrett, we actually have standards. Our entire zoning code is standards. They're requirements. We require no setback in the CD district. We require you can't have windows tinted. They can't have this. So we operate with those standards every day with every developer that comes to our door. So what we're doing now is trying to decide what do we want to be as a guideline versus what do we want to include in the zoning code as a requirement. And what has happened is the guidelines that have been adopted and that we've been working with for the last decade are guidelines that have been codified. So you are assigning subjective guidelines with statutory authority. And that has been the result of the conflict and the challenges. So what we want to do is find out in this urban realm that this is what she showed us is exactly what we did downtown. We blended it, Jim's work on the sidewalk and the right-of-way. The developers themselves wanted offices up high and wanted the open windows with the retail on the first floor. Every one of those new buildings we built and what Ron did follows this example without realizing they were. And through that, we found there's a disconnect between those guidelines that have been codified that weren't applicable to this urban realm we had designed. And we're trying to undo that and figure out of those, what is it that we want to reflect in our community. So the standards are already there for those developers. We talk to them every day. That's what Planning Commission does.
Okay. Well, so thank you. So my other question is, so have we failed miserably on the police department where there is no, you drive by and any interaction on that? And you don't have to answer that, but
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. By not answering it, you've answered it. And then
I think that's a yes.
Yeah, that's right.
The interaction.
Yeah, that's all I have. Thank you. Oh, I had one other question. What is a diverse? It was in the public realm, I think. A diverse public walkway. What is that?
Yeah, so if you don't like the word diverse, we could use something else.
I don't. So.
Not a
Okay.
problem. But think about it this way. Diverse would be the opposite from cohesive. It would be, uniqueness. But and again, those were just examples, things that we were placing up there as a way to start thinking differently.
Okay.
But I heard loud and clear, no diverse.
Thank you.
Got it.
Okay. Roger?
Would the word contrast be a little better? In other words, contrasting.
I don't think we want to use the word contrast.
Okay.
But I think what we're attempting to say with that statement is that it doesn't all have to look alike.
Yeah.
That there is some uniqueness. There's some way to think creatively. We don't all have to look exactly like everything else that's there.
It was diverse pedestrian walkway, right?
I think it was a diverse pedestrian.
Diverse places.
Yeah.
What'd you say, Chris? I'm sorry.
Diverse places.
Diverse places.
Under your design.
Yeah, it was under the design principles. So, but I understand that words connote things to people, and we have to think about that. So.
As usual, I generated conversation, but I didn't mean to do that. I had 3 other questions that were involved, so if you could bear with me a little bit. How do we balance the public realm concept, which I think is a great concept? We have public streets, public sidewalks. They're all of ours. We own them, from a not even a theoretical, from a practical sense, because we are a municipality. How do we balance that with the rights of private property? Because I think our country is built on the concept of private property. And so I noticed that in the standards, there's nothing there or even the guidelines addressing the respectfulness of the private property owner in terms of what we're trying to do. And the second question I had was, I noticed that, and I was there in July, and I noticed that the existing standards that we have, or guidelines, I'm not sure what they are anymore because we've interchanged those terms so often. But with our little dots in the list, overwhelmingly, people accepted all but one. I thought that was kind of fascinating. Wouldn't you agree that was kind of...
So what those were the goals.
Right. That's what I'm driving at, but that should drive your standards and your...
Precisely. That is the theoretical level, right? We have to think about goals. And so, yes, I think it was very telling that much of what was the existing goals were respected by and liked by the people who showed up. Right. And truthfully, if it had come out differently, we'd be having a much longer, in-depth conversation tonight about what the goals of this project should be.
And my last question is that I noticed that nowhere in any of your suggested goals or guidelines, and I know that we're just scratching the surface and we're at the beginning, I didn't see the word or even an inclination towards the concept of preservation. And I think there's a strong sense that some of those, and this is just me, in trying to explain my question a little bit, a lot of those places that people put their little dots on that were distinctly Kent were older, established, reflective buildings of maybe a greater time. Maybe a time when Kent was a little different, but they truly are. So is there any room in developing these standards and guidelines for the use of the term preservation to encourage preservation?
I'm actually going to take this one. I apologize. We have a preservation ordinance, actually, that allows for a property owner to get designated for as either local or state or historic. When we went to try to establish a historic district, which followed after they'd already codified the guidelines, the district, none of the property owners in the district wanted it. By having the historic preservation ordinance separate and distinct, which also needs to be addressed because it has a district that doesn't exist, with guidelines that reflect a true downtown, anyone who wants to seek that historic preservation has that opportunity without putting other restrictions or limitations on property owners that do not.
And we've already done that, correct?
Correct. We've been doing it.
We've supported.
We have. I will say I would prefer ordinances and guidelines, however, that actually match what we've actually been doing versus the challenges that the Community Development Department has been juggling for 10 years.
Yeah.
There's not balance.
I guess that's what I'm driving at. So should we, somewhere in our guidelines and standards, somehow address the concept of preservation?
Preservation should be addressed in the preservation ordinance.
Just in the ordinance?
Correct. And if a property owner is interested in obviously following that historic preservation, it can be reflected in our guidelines, yeah. But if you're trying to get at what we have now, I would disagree that isn't how we want to go about reflecting it in our guidelines, and definitely not in our standards.
Well, that's why we're asking the questions, right? Because
yeah.
we're trying to figure out what would be the best route to go on that. So.
And Garrett, just a real quick when you're cohesive, one of the issues that has come up repeatedly for us at Planning Commission and with the Architectural Review Board over this last decade is mass and size. A lot of issues and challenges with regards to Franklin and putting 6-story buildings next to 2-story. One of our Planning Commission members very astutely pointed out that when you look on Main Street, the hotel was always 6 stories higher than the 2-story. So that's what we're trying to make clear, is that you can have a downtown that has variety, diversity, and different approaches to the mass and the building structure versus everything on this block has to be 2-story only. Thanks. I'm sorry.
Can I jump in on that too? Because we obviously, and Bridget mentioned it, but we had a lot of internal dialogue, and we had help from consultants too early on when we were doing the downtown redevelopment. And Jim walked in a little late, but he would have been happy because all the principles, as Bridget said, sort of the principles that we used for our share of the public realm, so to speak, is very much in line with, what's being talked about here tonight. But at a kind of a bigger level, the one thing that I think is important is when you really dig into the sort of the Kent brand, what is Kent and all that kind of stuff, what you hear a lot is we have this unique personality. And we're a scale that's human-centered, you know what I mean? Like it's small, we're not Akron, we're not Cleveland. And those are really high value points for both residents, businesses, and tourists. And what we have heard, because we did our little sightseeing tours and we checked out other cities and the downtowns that they've redeveloped and so forth. And one of the things that we brought back and what we struggle with, which is some of what you're sensing and even within these guidelines, is how you have cohesion but still have personality. And we really think it's imperative not to lose our personality by making everything so homogeneous. Because quite candidly, that's what distinguishes us from almost everybody else. Our people are very different. We have a very diverse, thanks to Kent State, the world, we have people from all over the world, and we very intentionally wanted to sort of feature those people walking, sitting, mingling, mixing in our downtown, in the public realm. And I would argue that the same kind of applied to our sense of what our building should look like. And that's partly why we scraped where we could and put money together for public art, because that's that personality thing. And over again, what we hear from people is, I don't come back to Kent just because of a brick and mortar. I come back for the experience and the personality that sort of is imbibed in the community. So I think that's kind of that's that tension point, and I don't know where the answer is. I think what she's suggesting is we need to figure out where it rests on the continuum. But I'm here to make my pitch to say I think the more personality we allow in our downtown, the stronger we'll be in the long term, because it is what distinguishes us from a beautiful downtown in Hudson but it's not Hudson. We're going to have things that don't look as, it's just going to be different, and you want different, right? I mean, that's who we are. So forgive the intrusion. So.
Okay, Gwen, you had something?
I do. Just real quickly, you'd asked us a couple of questions, whether we like the paradigm shift. So just speaking for myself here, yes, I like it very much. I like the way that you stated it, and I like the way that I can kind of look towards thinking about this discussion further from that point of view. So, and then your second question was whether the examples were helpful. I thought that they were, and I wanted to just offer, like, perhaps like another example, speaking about what Garrett had brought up. So perhaps by defining like office space specifically, we could be talking about like if somebody wanted to come in and buy Acorn Alley and convert that into an entire office campus, right? So we would have a standard that right there on Main Street, like, no, you can't just purchase and develop an entire, that would be my example. Hopefully that makes sense, but perhaps like the Bistler building or something like that, yes, that could be first floor office based on where it is. Would be an example.
Granular level, and that number can move up and down, and we can do all sorts of things with it. But we have to think at a very high level where we wouldn't want that to happen, where we think retail is incredibly important in this street on that block. Those are the very high level conversations that we've yet to have. So we're not just drilling down and getting down to these very fine, minute standards. We are thinking up here as well. And really, we will come back to you at the end of this phase one, and now that we've heard a little bit more about this, and suggest where we think those intersections, those blocks, those streets are that's so important that we need to have these kinds of very high-level choices made. So we're not just thinking down here. We're up here as well, I promise.
And Lisa, I think if you can just expand upon what I think you're saying is that the design guidelines will not be uniform across the entire area.
They may very well not. I mean, we may very well have different standards. And again, I'm going to really keep, I'm really going to, sorry to keep being pedantic, but it's not, I think we need to continually remind ourselves that standards are mandatory and guidelines are not, and use those terms in those ways. But yes, I don't anticipate that I think we'll have certain things that will be uniform across, but I do think that we will end up with places where we have differences based on key intersections and key blocks and key streets.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Oh, you had a question, Rob?
Yeah. I do, but it's kind of more with kind of on Garrett's concern about the use of a word. And I just kind of wanted to get to that.
Is there a question that you have for her?
Well, it went to her. I wanted to kind of understand it a little better from Garrett's standpoint. He asked that the word diverse was problematic in the terms that were being used regarding, I believe it was sidewalks and so on and so forth. What was problematic with that word for you? I just want to understand a little better.
When you try to manufacture, in my opinion, manufacture diversity, whether it be in building design or whatever else, feels artificial, right? So you have to let it evolve naturally, what the differences between the buildings would be.
Okay.
I'll chat with you afterwards if you want.
Okay.
Heidi?
Yeah, so this, I guess my question gets at how do we define downtown? And, we have these edges of downtown. We have a current overlay district.
Correct.
But, in our policies, I believe, it looks like we may be, going beyond in some respects. Buildings are being, as some buildings are being redesigned, replaced, urban, basically just how are we defining downtown? And are these just applicable to the downtown as defined today?
So that's actually another key policy choice. Your existing overlay district, and I apologize, I don't have a map on a slide, is downtown as well as west of the river, and that's the current overlay district. And so we did initially have some discussions back in July as to whether or not the standards should apply, for example, only in the areas currently zoned CD, which is your commercial downtown district. So that is yet another policy choice that we will need to have, a conversation that needs to be had. But truthfully, we couldn't get to all of that tonight. So we've limited here to just to sort of show you what this paradigm shift is and to give you some examples of standards and guidelines based on the conversation we had back in July. But yes, that is one of the other large policy choices is, do we narrow the district, which is what we've heard from some people, that perhaps it's only just what's currently zoned CD today and not include with the area west of the river. So yeah, that's another large policy choice that we need to discuss.
For examples are City Hall in the overlay district.
It's
Our
actually,
new City Hall that we're building.
It's just outside of it. But the thing, too, is the overlay district, we use that term because it was based on what was going to become a historic district. It did not. So the configuration, the commercial buildings that are included in it were based on what was considered historic at that time. And remember, we had, we do have historic buildings that way. Virtually all of them have been redeveloped or renovated in some way. So that's the other thing. We have to remember that we call it the overlay, but it was based in the original design guidelines that were done for Main Street, Kent, on the premise that there was going to be a historic district. So even that needs to be reevaluated. It also included many residential properties, and we have never in practice applied it to residential because there was nothing in the guidelines that would have allowed us to do what happens in Hudson, where you have to go through an ARB process even to change your garage door. So the district didn't align with the guidelines, and the guidelines were codified. So it's been a challenge to unbundle. So we need to sometimes change these terms we're using, and some of what Elisa is talking about has been already applied in the CD district. That's pretty much like when we look at the CD district and we talk about the sidewalks and this urban realm, that is always where our focus has been. So we're going to be looking at that, but we need to figure out what areas we want to apply this to.
Thank you.
Okay, Roger?
Yeah, Bridget, you might be able to answer this too. So it appears to be the general public. I mean, you work with this every day. The complexity of trying to understand. So is it possible for us to do away with, like the term, the overlay district, and just designate that CD district as being part of, that our standards and the guidelines are going to apply to?
Yes.
So that we don't have that multi-layer, because...
Yes, and actually I can tell you for staff who went through literally more development in this city than it had ever seen, the application to the CD district is logical. Identifying standards that would apply to a street level approach, they are no different than standards we have for height in certain zoning districts. That would be able to be applied and make sense and expand upon this urban realm that we're trying to basically make, where people come and want to stay. The overlay district as a concept really doesn't apply if you move things to standards and you make guidelines for the downtown district. If we codify things we want to, like 70% space needs to be glass, that kind of thing, but then the guidelines apply to those commercial areas.
Okay, so can I ask, John, can I ask the question again? Okay, so would that change then the responsibilities of the ARB, let's say, if the ARB still is in existence?
Yeah, well, that's another thing we need to look at. We also have to understand that the ARB was created for a process that is, if that is unbundled, then we need to look at that. Okay. Remember, they did make just recommendations. They issued a certificate of appropriateness on a recommendation, and it was citywide. It's very challenging when that was applied that way, and we had Wendy's. Okay? I mean, challenging them on their logo and sign Yes, we can limit the size of their sign. We can tell them they can't use a pole sign anymore, which I'm grateful for. Things like that. But to apply those guidelines that were codified in the way that we were was very challenging. So once we get what we want as guidelines and what we want to codify as standards and decide where it's applied, then the next step is looking at that.
And those guidelines and standards are going to continue to support, based on what we heard in July, the goals that
Correct.
overwhelmingly people
And I
want
do
us
want to remind you, on the historic preservation 1393, we also have an accompanying legislation that has the Committee on Design and Preservation. And historic preservation initiatives should be couched within that commission, because that is what the certified local government requirement is for the state of Ohio. So we have two boards, one of which was created for the certified local government standard that I can't fully operationalize to the level that SHPO would like me to, because we have given authority for historic guidelines in a non-historic district.
Very good. Is that clear to everyone?
Yeah. And now you know the rest.
Let's just say it's been hard. It's been a hard decade of development. Let's just put it that way.
No, thank you, Bridget. I think that the reason for the questions are to get information out.
Yes.
I think that's real important, that people hear the complexities of what we're trying to do in our city collectively,
Right.
not just
Right. Honestly,
administration
when you look at this, when we updated the whole entire zoning code, we went through every chapter, every word. There was so much of it that didn't apply because of time, changes in standards, changes in what urban design had brought, and the fact that we had redeveloped the entire area. So there's just, sometimes you have to look at things and unbundle it, and that doesn't mean that everything pulls forward. We have to do what's best to promote the community as a whole going forward and put the authorities for certain realms where they belong.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's been very informative this evening, and I'm sure the next episode will be more informed. So we thank you for your time. And Bridget, I think you're the front and center.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great job. We're going to do a little computer swap just for a minute to the next design group. So give us just 1 minute. Patty's going to hold it. There's only a couple slides in this one. Oh, you don't have your adapter.
See after I have my laptop. How could you argue against that realm? You have to be able to business owners and opportunity.
Seems like there's a joke, like how many consultants does it take to switch a computer, right? Sorry, guys.
Doctor students.
Now, I say that, but let me just give you a little, I had a chance to be introduced to the consultant team, a couple of the members of the team, not everybody, but I have to say I was very impressed. So anytime when we're like, we've hired good people, I want you to make sure we use them. So part of what they're here to do tonight is be introduced. Bridget will give you, some of the formal remarks, but really, I think they're exceptional. And I know Bridget was excited when she hired them. And, she works with Patty very closely on our Sustainability Commission. And even Patty came back after meeting them, and she's like, oh, they are so good. So I really, this is great. A lot of times people joke, oh, you hire a consultant and they take your watch and tell you what time it is and you pay them for that. But I can tell you, these guys and ladies are really good at what they do. And I think they'll be terrific representatives for the city in this process. And I think we can learn a lot and they can set us in a good direction. So I've raised the bar really high, so they better do a good presentation now too, right? So
Pressure's on.
Well, while they're getting their computer set up, I'm just going to give a little reminder. So you're going to meet tonight Karamita. They are the consulting group that we hired to do our climate action plan. If you remember back in December, Patty and I were here and presented the greenhouse gas. That first step in moving towards addressing emissions in our community was done on a volunteer basis, and with Patty and I, who, while we became familiar with it, it is definitely not in our wheelhouse. There is a science and a methodology to developing a response to emissions and addressing climate action. So we hired a group, and thank you very much for that appropriations to do that. And they have been in town this week. Patty and I have been meeting with them actually virtually for several weeks now, and they're here doing interviews with the different representatives from the different sectors. If you remember from our greenhouse gas inventory, emissions were ranked and basically identified versus sectors. There was basically solid waste, and then there's the utilities and that. So they dug into our greenhouse gas inventory and are meeting with and interviewing representatives from those. Through all that data, they will then come back to us with a response plan. And I'm going to let them go into the details of what that will include and the types of initiatives and possibilities that will come out of that as soon as we get this computer figured out. I actually can let Nick, are you going to be speaking? We'll let him go and start, and then hopefully the slides will come up. No signal.
Oh, there it is.
Yay.
Right on cue.
Yes, the joke would have been appropriate. While we're not, computer experts, we are experts on climate action planning, and so hopefully we can present that today. But first of all, thank you all for giving us the opportunity to work with the community of Kent and hosting us this week. We've been here since Monday, and it's been a lovely experience. We've had a great time around your community and meeting with several individuals and groups since we've been here, and we have a lot more to go tomorrow and Friday. My name is Nick McCreary. I'm the Senior Sustainability Manager at Skarnekia, and I'm here with my team, the city's team. And really the goal of this presentation is to provide y'all with a preview of our approach to climate action planning. I am not going to get into the weeds of what our climate action plan will look like, because we do not know. This is our first step. We want to engage with the community before we come up with recommendations, because as you'll see, community engagement is our first and most important step in our plan. But on the agenda, I'm going to try and keep this around 10 minutes, and then I'm happy to answer any questions, and we have a brilliant team here as well who can answer anything that I cannot. But first, I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction of our organization and our team. Then I'm going to take you through a bit of our framework and how we view climate action planning, our approach, and then open it up for questions. So Skarnekia, actually tomorrow, is 34 years old. We were founded by Dr. Vicky Skarnekia, who is still our CEO and Chief Technical Officer and has been involved with this project a little bit, as she is with a lot across the company, because she's brilliant and obviously successful with a 34-year-old consulting company. And we've been doing sustainability work long before sustainability was a term that anyone had heard of. And that's really through the innovation of Dr. Skarnekia and some of the seniors within the organization. We are a large organization of about 120 individuals with multiple divisions within our company. Broadly speaking, we have a land division, a compliance division, and a sustainability division. The individuals I'm here with today are all from the sustainability division, and I'll give a bit of an introduction there. So our senior team for our Climate and Decarbonization Strategies Group is our technical name. As you can see on the board there is Dr. Skarnekia, Dr. Chung, Dr. Tui, myself, and Dr. Kiramandu. Hopefully by the letters there you can tell that we are actual experts. If I would just get a PhD, we would look like even more experts. But
Slacker.
Yeah, that's right. But I can assure you that we are one of the, if not the only firm with experts at this level working on projects actively. We don't have a business development person. Every single one of our experts works on plans. Dr. Chung will work with us on greenhouse gas inventories. Dr. Tui will work with us if we do anything with reporting. And my background is exclusively in sustainability my entire career, and before I was a consultant, I actually worked in higher education teaching courses on sustainability and writing climate action plans for major universities. So I have experience from the university side with the town-gown relationship, and so I think that's unique for our perspective. And then specifically for the team that's going to be working on this project. Like I said, we pull from a lot of resources within Caramita. If we have a geology question, well, I sit next to a geologist in the office, so I can ask Bruce. But for this specific team, we are all here today. Like I said, my name is Nick. We have Maddie, Emily, and Amber with us. All are extremely qualified and intelligent, just like everyone in our organization is, and are uniquely qualified for different aspects of the planning process. Amber has experience working inside a city organization with the City of Indianapolis. Maddie is a trained engineer and will be doing all the hard data that maybe is a little bit over my head, but that's why we have Maddie with us. And Emily has a great background in community organizing and a wide range of ESG topics. And one other thing that I think sets us apart, and it sounds like I'm selling you on us, which we already work for you. So I'm not. I'm just very proud of the organization and hopefully give you a sense of that before I get into our approach. All of us have roots in the Midwest. Both Maddie and Emily are native Ohioans. Maddie from the Toledo area, and Emily from Granville, or right? Got it right. And Amber and myself are from Indiana. So we come from the Midwest. We love the culture here. We all live here. We want to see this succeed because sustainability is our passion. The Midwest is where our roots are. So it's more than just a job for us. This is a passion. We're just lucky enough and hardworking enough to get paid to do that. So know that we're not just here to do a one-off plan and get out. This is something we truly care about. So that's Caramita, and now I'm going to give, again, a very high overview of our approach to climate action planning. And this is just sort of the synopsis of the goal that we have for Kent, is to deliver a suite of pragmatic and science-based greenhouse gas reduction strategies that are in line with the 2015 Paris Climate Accord, which y'all passed a resolution in agreement with, which is an amazing accomplishment. I want to hone in on a few things within this statement. First, greenhouse gas reductions, right? You might hear the term sustainability intermixed with climate action, and while that's not incorrect, it's like a square and a rectangle. Sustainability is a broader term that encompasses all range of environmental advocacy and protection, from waste reduction to water quality to access to natural spaces. And while we agree that all of those are wonderful, our scope of work is climate action, and that specifically is looking at greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I'm not going to get technical, except for maybe right this second. Greenhouse gases is a suite of gases, and when we will refer to that suite of gases from methane to NOx and CO2 as carbon, and that's because we use that as an equivalency term when we're talking about greenhouse gas reductions. So we will be specifically focusing on strategies that reduce greenhouse gases from Kent, because greenhouse gases are the cause of the climate emergency that we are living in right now. Now I want to focus on the word pragmatic. This is extremely important to us, and it has several meanings in our mind. First and foremost is the actual definition of pragmatic. This plan needs to be actionable. It needs to be able to be implemented in your community. And that means it needs to be community-based. We do not see ourselves coming in here and telling y'all what to do. Kent has a long record of environmental advocacy and action that honestly predates my life. So y'all are the experts. We're here to learn from you, shine a light on the amazing work that you've done, from the best fresh water in the country, I hear. I'm picking up a lot in these interviews. From cleaning up a river that I read about when I was in grad school being the dirtiest river, leading to environmental advocacy. So those are wonderful accomplishments. We plan to shine a light on that and sort of help frame action moving forward. Now, our action isn't just going to be, our action is going to be based in science. So we are all technical experts in the field of climate science. And every recommendation that we make will have technical backing with objective studies being done to illustrate projected greenhouse gas reductions and cost savings. Another thing that I want to talk about around the science-based aspect of our approach is that, one, I've heard this in interviews here, and we hear it in interviews with a whole range of clients that we work with, is, well, why are we doing this? How big of an impact can we actually have? We're just a town of 28,000. Well, one, that's not necessarily untrue, but that's not also the main reason for climate action planning. First and foremost, you can have an impact because every reduction in greenhouse gases matters. But additionally, we are creating a climate action plan that will position Kent to thrive in an ever-changing world. So climate change is occurring, and we have done, which I'll talk about in our approach, we have done a study that shows what climate changes will be happening to the region, and a climate action plan addresses that to make sure that Kent continues to thrive in the face of those changing situations. Both climatic changes, regulatory changes, the cost of energy, there will be changes coming up. This plan will position Kent ideally to thrive in those situations now, so you're not having to scramble when those changes are at your door. So climate action plan is also about resilience, not just about mitigation. It's both. So I'm going to walk you through our approach, which we are well underway. And this, again, is very high level. I'm happy to dive in more if you have questions at the end. But essentially, what we start is a broad overview, and we bring it down through community engagement, through our expertise, to recommendations that we will deliver to the city of Kent. So starting with the climate scenario summary, this is what I was talking about when I said we were looking at the best science available for how climate change is going to impact Kent. And this is just one graph that we put together that models the climate reduction scenarios that have been outlined by the IPCC, which is the general body that is the foremost experts on the changing climate. So we are modeling Kent's emission reductions based on the best science and how climate change is going to specifically impact Kent, so that we can get an idea of what we're dealing with for this specific region. Climate change impacts areas in many different ways. Next is a benchmarking summary. So really we want to look at what other towns and communities in this situation are doing about climate, for climate action, both within Ohio, and we really focused on the Midwest, looking at communities that have institutes of higher education within their community, because we know that is something that makes Kent unique. We're finding out more and more every day what else makes Kent unique, but we did know that. And so we looked at quite a few communities, but the 5 that we chose to use in the benchmarking process were Toledo, Lucas County, Athens, Oberlin, Bloomington, Indiana, where Indiana University is, and Lincoln, Nebraska, where the University of Nebraska is. And one, this is to get a lay of the land, what others are doing. If we can pull ideas from that, great. But also to see what others are not doing. And you can see up there where the X's are not lined up with the different initiatives, seeing how we can fill those in, because we know that those initiatives are the best available solutions to climate change. And this is the step we're on right now, and it precedes our technical work, which is the mitigation matrix process, and that's community engagement. We are doing our best to meet with as many stakeholders, decision makers, and experts in the community from the various sectors outlined in the greenhouse gas inventory that was done in 2016, to really start to get an idea of what is going to work for Kent, what is going to inspire Kent, what's going to empower your community members to take the climate action plan on as their responsibility and to be excited about doing it. And so we're literally, I think, right in the middle of the process right now. We've been here since Monday, and we'll be departing on Friday, and we have about 15 or 16 interviews that we have set up, including a community event tomorrow in this space to get more broad community feedback that we will take back and work into our mitigation matrix. So our mitigation matrix is where our technical work begins. We take the ideas we get through the community engagement, and we start to put actual data behind those recommendations. So for everything that we will propose, we will apply a greenhouse gas reduction projection over a period of time, in this case 3 to 5 years, because that's the scope of the plan. And we will map that against the feasibility, which is essentially going to be the cost of implementation, both considering the capital and the reoccurring costs, but also the cost avoidance or the cost savings that are associated with a particular recommendation. And this the mitigation matrix is not just a scatter plot. There's a lot of work that goes in behind it, but this is what we use to sort of help organizations or communities prioritize different recommendations that we have developed. And it is from this that we will then narrow down our final recommendations before the climate action plan is produced. And then after the mitigation matrix, the feasibility study we like to think of as another layer of troubleshooting of, okay, we have these recommendations, we want to go back into the community and make sure that, hey, if we're recommending doing X with the sewer treatment plant, we want to make sure with the individuals who are actually going to be implementing this that it's feasible. Feasible from a labor perspective, feasible from a cost perspective, because we will not want to make recommendations to Kent that will not work, because that's not doing our job. So feasibility study is really working with the individuals that would be carrying out the recommendations to ensure that we're on the same page and that the recommendations are feasible. And finally, next steps is we will start to work on the mitigation matrix, and we already sort of have in the background. We will take the input that we have gained during this week here, combine that with our technical expertise to produce a large array of recommendations that we think are potentially feasible for Kent, and we will bring those to the city for discussion, and then through the feasibility study for a first draft of the climate action plan that would then be turned into a final draft after review that would be the final deliverable. So those are our next steps. Happy to take any questions that y'all have about the process or our company.
Ready?
Yeah. Well, I'm excited. I just want to say that comment. I'm very excited about this. It just seems like we're really taking this seriously as a co-sponsor of the resolution to support the Paris Accord, and also the directions to our Sustainability Commission to come up with pragmatic, impactful ways that we, the city, and our citizens can, what we can do to mitigate climate change issues, and also to be resilient within. I like that term. I'm a little disappointed that basically I just heard about this. I'm not able to attend the public meeting tomorrow night. Tracy's not here. She was the other co-sponsor. She may be able to. It just feels like a one-shot deal to get your ear. So, and I am aware of some other potential things that people are interested in doing in Kent that maybe won't come up tomorrow. So what can I do to be able to connect with you guys and also connect some other people that I don't think are going to be able to get involved with you tomorrow, or, you know, in this short time that we have?
We did send notice out. It's been in the paper. We had it on the sign. I did send something out to council, so I apologize that you didn't see it prior to this.
I just have a commitment.
What I will tell you, though, if you get anything to me, Patty and I are meeting with them biweekly and emailing. So if there's concepts that you want to share or things you want to share, we can do that. I do want to remind people, this is a climate action plan, not a sustainability plan. So it's going to be geared towards our greenhouse gas emissions. Oftentimes in the Sustainability Commission, Patty hears concepts and ideas. We are looking at those sectors that have the greatest emissions and in a practical way that we can address. So right now it's kind of they have the data, they're exploring options, things like that. So, but anything you get, give it to me, and I can make sure that that is communicated to them.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to see that you're looking at things like a water treatment plant, you know, methane mitigation, perhaps, or reuse. We're looking at, there's a lot of interest in doing some large-scale composting. That would be something that the university and the city can join together in doing. That would have that impact on greenhouse gases.
Absolutely.
You know, seeing the research. So, as long as I know that we can continue to have the conversation beyond this week, it would be great.
Yeah, absolutely, and we plan to do so, and sorry that we're not able to meet tomorrow, but communicating through Bridget, we would be more than happy and excited to meet with anyone who are not able to this week, and we want to gain your impact, and on the few things that you mentioned, large-scale composting. I personally have experience setting up multiple composting systems, both at a university, which is quite a bit more complicated than it may appear to teach 18-year-olds how to compost. So we have experience with that, and we're more than willing to hear all ideas.
But those are the kinds of things that you guys will be recommending?
Yes.
Like, if you hear there's interest, and, you probably have a menu of ideas that other communities have done, and that could be applied to Kent.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, correct. If composting, large-scale industrial composting is feasible, then absolutely it would be a recommendation because there are significant greenhouse gas reductions associated with shifting from landfilling to composting.
Thank you.
Robin, would you have another question?
I didn't know I asked any, but okay. The question that I have is, I know you're going to be doing outreach. What's the educational component to the residents of the community, and how are you going to best approach that aspect? Then I have another one after that, if I can.
That was a question. Good. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so education, to get a little bit more into the details about the structure we're considering for the climate action plan, education will be one of the key areas that we address because we know a huge lack of climate action comes from education, and so that will be integrated into any of the strategies that we propose as appropriate ways to educate the community on both why there's a climate action plan in place and the benefits of it. And there's a lot of research that we will base our education initiatives on. Like one example would be block leaders has been shown to have significant impacts for educating particular communities, because we recognize even within Kent being a unique community itself, that within Kent there is very likely many unique communities that different educational approaches will be necessary, and we plan to do that.
Okay, you did such a good job. Why don't you ask another question?
Thank you. I appreciate that. The last one is the measurables and where we end up identifying success in what we're trying to accomplish, and our ability to then translate that out to the community on why this is a valuable process for us to be engaging in.
So is the question what are the measures that we will be tracking?
Exactly.
Okay.
What are the measurables going to be when you're going out? We're looking at tamping down the issues and concerns that we've identified as a climate danger. What are the measurables on that? Where are we now? Where is our expectation if we implement the program and do it well, or don't do it as well, or our failures at it?
Sure.
What is that going to look like for us?
So the measurements for the climate action plan will be in technically metric tons of CO2 equivalent. And that is what the greenhouse gas inventory produced as a baseline. And we will recommend continual updating of that baseline, because that is how you measure progress of if that baseline is being reduced. Now, we'll be able to point to particular initiatives, because through the mitigation matrix process, we will identify projected greenhouse gas reductions per initiative through both expertise and research. And so Kent will be able to track how effective certain projects are or not by judging annual greenhouse gas inventory updates.
Where do you guys do that? I mean, how is that done, and how do you actually use, what instrument do you use to accomplish that end?
That's a good question, and it varies based on what information is available. And so the way that I understand that Kent did the original greenhouse gas inventory was through a straightforward way without getting into the weeds of greenhouse gas inventories, is through utility bills is one way to measure. So on your utility bill, you will get your usage, and you can translate the usage, which is typically in kilowatt hours, to the equivalent of metric ton emissions from those kilowatt hours. And we use what's called an emission factor, which is basically a multiple that is different for each area based on the grid intensity. So how much fossil fuels are going onto the grid to the homes here. So we can tell by if you have X number of kilowatt hours times the emission factor for this region, then we can say that's how much metric ton emissions are coming from what's called scope 2 residential. And so we have, that's the technical expertise that I talked about, where we are world experts on doing that. We just generally don't discuss that level of detail with the public, but I appreciate you asking that question, because that's where we believe it starts to get a little esoteric for people and confusing. But we're very happy and excited to talk about the details of measurements, and be happy to share that with you.
Yeah, and I wasn't throwing that out there to, like you say, get in the weeds.
Yeah.
It's just the bottom line is our ability to be able to explain it to the general public, our ability to identify whether or not we're moving in the right direction,
right,
so on and so forth.
No.
But thank you, I appreciate it.
No, that's spot on to something that we're very cognizant of, is being able to take that very technical understanding of greenhouse gases and explain it to an individual who isn't an expert on how we're doing and the importance of the direction we're moving.
Roger, you have a question?
Yeah, maybe I directed at Dave. Dave, looking at the size, the geographical size of Kent State University, are they at the table with us on this in some way, or is there some kind of a connection with them? Because that's a pretty big chunk of land. You know?
Yeah, at many levels they are. And even tonight, Melanie Knowles is in the audience from Kent State. She's a sustainability director, office director, whatever her official title is.
I'm sorry, I would have directed the question to you. I didn't know you were here.
So yeah, I couldn't get into the weeds on that one. I just know that they're intimately involved with us on that. And actually, in a couple more items, we have a partnership that we're proposing to even amplify further. I think kind of we'll get to more of the stuff that Heidi and even Robin talked about in terms of education, the local community. These guys can only do so much from their home base. They're going to be here, help us, but we're looking to have a permanent presence, again, on staff to help do a lot of those things.
Okay. And it's also our plan to involve the Kent State community as much as possible. We're meeting with Melanie tomorrow to start that relationship. And like I said, I have experience with being in Melanie's position, working in higher ed. So I've written climate action plans for universities, so I understand how that can be, and the importance of the relationship with the community.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for your time and your expertise.
Thank you.
Be looking forward to talking with you or listening to you again.
Likewise.
Thank you. That concludes community development.
Okay, I'm going to call over the Council Committee of the Whole. First thing on the agenda is we have a couple of interviews for boards and commissions. Amy, you want to call the first one up?
Sure. The first person is Jeff Forstner. He's applying for the Board of Building Appeals and the Board of Zoning Appeals.
Hello, Mayor, committee members. My name is Jeff Forstner. I own a house at 711 South Water, and I'm very interested in helping out with the Board of Zoning Appeals and the committee to learn more about that process. I have an MBA from Indiana Wesleyan, and I'm a lifelong learner. I definitely have experience with Robert's Rules of Order as a board member of church, as well as a local benevolent hands-on Northeast Ohio for 4 years. And I really have a desire to obviously make sure that Kent continues to develop in a way that's attractive to continued investment and betterment. So I definitely have a vested interest. My wife is also an insurance agent that will be housing at our residence. So I'd like to consider my committee membership. Any questions?
Questions? Amy? Or Heidi, I mean. I'm looking at Amy.
Yeah.
She's got me trained good.
Thank you very much for stepping up and applying.
Sure.
What is your relationship with rental housing? Number one, and number two, do you have any particular attitudes towards rental housing in the city of Kent?
No, the current resident that we have, we'll be moving in there, but currently our sons live there with another renter, so we're currently, renting out. But yeah, I think that's a very good question. I mean, it's important that Kent keeps control over, obviously, the rentals with college students, and I definitely understand firsthand, the importance of them being in the right zone. So I definitely agree with got to have good controls.
So could you tell me your address? Did you say your address already? I'm sorry.
711 South Water.
711 South Water?
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that must be my ward. Yeah. Thank you.
Third house from the corner.
Yep.
Further, Heidi?
Not right now. Thanks.
Anybody else have any questions? Gwen?
Hi, thank you for applying.
Sure.
I just want to ask you what it is about, we've got a number of vacancies on different boards. What is it specifically about the Board of Zoning Appeals that appeals to you?
Well, I'd just like to learn more about the process, as going to be adding an addition and so forth. So I definitely have personal interest, but also, like I said, I want to help the community and make sure that those appeals are handled in the right way.
Have you ever had any experience working with the Board of Zoning Appeals in the past? So this is something new to explore, huh?
Yes.
Lifelong learner.
Yep.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amy?
Our next applicant is Laura Skarnekia.
Laura, name and address, and tell us why.
I'm just going to grab this. First of all, I'm very impressed you got my name absolutely correct.
Oh my God.
Yes, it's a tough one. So I'm Laura Skarnekia. I live at 714 Vine Street, Ward 5. Yes. So I am a 24-year Kent resident. 10 years ago, I purchased my house in the town while I was in graduate school with really the intent of selling it as an investment when I graduated. But watching the town revitalize and grow enthused me so much. Here we are, I'm a decade later, I'm still here, remodeling that house and rehabbing it. I worked a lot with learning about zoning and permits, and for some reason have a little bit of a personal passion for zoning. I can't explain that, but I do follow the variances when I see the signs. I have been present at a couple of meetings. The last board meeting that I went to, there's a zoning appeal a couple doors down from me in the neighborhood, and I realized I was just really enthralled by the entire conversation of all of the variances and appeals leading up to that. So I was reading the Tree City Bulletin to see when brush pickup was, and I saw that there was a place on the board that was open, and I just came off of a year of the leadership Portage County. I loved it so much, and I just want to contribute to the town because I love the town. I'm going to stay here. So that is my reasoning for being here tonight.
We have questions.
Go ahead.
Gwen?
I would just ask, so it sounds like you've already answered what it is that you find most interesting about it. Have you had any experience working or going before our Board of Zoning Appeals, or this is just an interest?
Personally, no. All of my projects have met the board, all of the zoning standards, so I never have had to go for an appeal or a variance. Yes.
I think. Heidi?
Yeah, I just want to kind of balance the same question you did touch on about rental housing. That comes up a lot in BZA Planning Commission as well. So I just, it looks as if you've looked at how that it seems important for your concern with how the community balances a college rental community. So is that part of your passion for why you would be applying?
Yes, I know that doesn't necessarily fall under the direct jurisdiction of the Board of Zoning Appeals, of course, but obviously I went here as a student, so I was a college student at Kent and now a resident at Kent. As a homeowner, I've certainly balanced that concern about how do we maintain a really family-friendly, owner-occupied housing environment here while also offering housing to the college kids. In fact, Heidi, I think you live around the block from me, and we've had a couple of conversations about some of the plights I've had as I've navigated this in the last 10 years. I think that the city has made leaps and strides in terms of attracting homeowners and keeping families here and really having some good regulations about, where students can live and how many can live in a house. And so that is something I definitely think about. I acknowledge that's not necessarily the work and task of this board, but I want to make this community good for students, but also very much for families and people who live there, myself being one of them, of course.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Thank
Seeing
you.
none, we'll vote on our meeting on October the 16th, or 19th, I'm sorry, in 2 weeks. So thank you for applying. Move on to City Hall update. Melanie Baker, please.
Oh.
Not right.
I just don't have a whole lot today, so I thought I needed a little entertainment, lighten things up. So if you watch it, we are steadily making bag on this. I feel it's grueling for me, but we are seeing change. So some of the big things that have happened, you'll notice that most of the concrete walls that are going to need our brick facade are almost all completely up. There's a small section left open in the center so that we can gain access down to the bottom. We didn't really realize how small the site was until we started building. It's extremely tiny to get all of this on there. So they're doing a great job to keep everything kind of safe and within that area. Our retaining walls, all 4 of those, so there's 3 on the north side of the building, have been placed, put up, and poured. So you'll see some of that framing come down on that. And then there is one along South Water Street that is also completed. So that's just going to look like a concrete wall right now, but remember it does get a brick facade on both sides along with a nice stone cap. We have gained permission because of the weather setting in. We wanted to be able to get our drainage in along the outside, so our footer drains in. Because we don't have the floor poured, and now with our concerns with lack of gaining concrete, we really feel it's important for us to try and keep that site dry. So we did work with the structural engineer, and we'll begin backfilling up against council chambers and begin putting waterproofing on the backside of that. So you'll see that begin here in the next couple weeks. Really exciting. You can't see it because the scaffolding's around it, but the elevator is almost 3/4 of the way up, so that's almost completed. The stairwell on what would be the northeast side of the building is completed and up. And we will be beginning the, what will eventually be open, but we do have to have the concrete along the side up near council chambers and where the offices will be. But that stairwell B, and that's up towards that atrium area. Probably the most exciting thing and the main reason I have my hat on tonight, Epic Steel is our steel subcontractor of Tamarius. And they have asked us if we would like to be a part of a topping out ceremony. And what that entails is Tamarius will get that last piece of steel that will be set. They'll go ahead and powder coat it and paint it for us, and then what they'd like to do is bring that out to us so that we can all have an opportunity to sign it and invite the community out to go ahead and sign that. And then that would be the last piece of steel that's placed. When we place that, then of course there's a little ceremony that goes along with that, and there's a placing of a tree and of course the flag at the top of the building. So I'll keep you informed on that, but we just learned of that last week, and so I'm pretty excited about that. I figure the time we have to bring that out is going to be about mid-February, worst storms ever since 1970s. So I'm hoping I can work maybe with the fire chief. I may need to put that inside somewhere for us to do that, but hopefully that's what's coming on the horizon, and we're pretty excited about it. So unless there's any questions.
Believe me, we're in. After all this time, we're in.
All right.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you. Thanks,
Any questions before you leave? None. Thank you. Next on the agenda is proposed sustainability part-time position, Mr. Roller.
Yeah, I kind of already gave a little bit of the spoiler alert, but I mean, hopefully you read your packet and you knew it anyways. We've been having conversations internally and somewhat externally with the Kent State University about, look, we know the importance of environmental stewardship. It's a high nail priority kind of thing in Kent, and we wanted to be able to continue to devote attention to it. And, you know, we were starting to have cracks in the staff, so to speak, in terms of our ability to keep pace even just the sustainability staffing, the more active they get, the more work gets put on somebody. And the question, for the most part, it's been Bridget and Patty. They like to joke about, well, this is all Harrison's fault because he was so excited about this stuff when he was here. He volunteered for everything. He did everything, went way beyond the call of duty. And now he left us, and they're like having to live up to his standards, and that's a bit unreasonable given the other duties they have. So all of that stuff, and of course the general partnership that we're always kind of having conversations with Kent State, and what you guys working on, and what priorities and value things that you need done. And quite candidly, this was an area where there was a lot of overlap, and a boundary of the campus. Air, water, the environmental stuff doesn't really care about where the campus begins and where the community begins. So this seemed like, hey, this could be an opportunity to continue our tradition of partnering. And if you remember, we actually started this way back. We did a partnership with a kind of a 50-50 split with Kent State on a code enforcement. It was the first kind of getting into neighborhoods in Bridget's department, and eventually that led to a permanent position at Kent State and a lot of activity. And we just heard from the applicant that it was noticeable. Those changes have been noticeable, and I think a lot of that is just the boots on the street, right? And so we feel like we need boots on the street for the environment as well. We're obviously gearing up for our climate action plan, and that's going to produce attention, interest, and some action items. And so all of that seems to us to line up quite well with the timing for us to bring somebody on board. Now, that being said, our budget director back there looks at me and says, you can't hire anybody. We don't have the money for that. And so we get creative, and that's why we're at least trying to ease our way into this and try to do a shared position. I was delighted that Kent State was open to the concept, whereby actually they essentially are an employee of the university that would work half-time for the university and the other half-time for us, and the university basically invoices us our share. We would have office space, I presume, in Bridget's area, but the beauty is, and Melanie, plug your ears, but I'm hoping that because they'll be up there as well, that there will be things where Melanie will be like, well, I can help. I'm a campus thing, but this has value to the community. If nothing else, her knowledge base and the resources that she has is going to be available to our staffer too, because it's a shared staffer. So for us, we just felt like this was a really good opportunity. It's a manageable cost to get into the game again. We had a position years ago, sustainability planner, I think it was titled. It eventually morphed into our, it did recycling. A lot of that was recycling focused. And then when we had the Great Recession, it essentially went away, and the person actually shifted over to Main Street Kent. So we at least didn't lay anybody off, but they kind of changed their job focus, and we haven't yet been able to sort of backfill in that position. So anyways, that's kind of the backdrop. Bridget, is there anything you want to add? Or, Melanie's here if you wanted to hear from Kent State. We're obviously continuing to we've had initial conversations about the logistics, hours and who's their supervisor. Bridget and Melanie will essentially work that out. I think Bridget's just so happy. She's like, hey, some help.
I don't think everyone fully understands the time commitment that actually goes into this, and we're half joking about Harrison. He really was like, yeah, we can do this climate action plan. And then once we looked at it, that greenhouse gas inventory that this Karamita is working with was done with volunteers and staff. We are not scientists. We are not schooled in that. We were able to get through, although I will tell you, they are so on it. They found something. I'm like, oh, let me go into the program. Robin, we paid for a program that allowed us to do that greenhouse gas inventory, and we entered the data into the program, and it tells us some of it's modeling, some of it's hard data, and they actually found an error in it. So that's why you need somebody that is focused and targeted on this. With the commitment of the community to move to this next step of having a climate action plan, we are going to, a lot of this is behavioral change. A lot of it is education change. A lot of this is going to be meeting with groups and educating them on what we need to do to reduce our emissions, because we are a city. that is part of a much larger region, which is part of a state and a country. So everything we do, a lot of it is going to be incentivizing behavioral change by explaining why we're doing what we're doing. So I can tell you, Patty and I have been stretched thin with the sustainability. I mean, it's always been under the Community Development Department, but it has been active, very active for the last 5 years, thanks to Harrison. Actually, the Paris Accord and the Council's commitment to that was really what then initiated Harrison to move forward with the, and you charged the Sustainability Commission with the development of that plan. And it was when I dove into it, see what that plan involved, that was when we knew we had to do these steps. And that's where we're at. We did one with our volunteers, but we definitely would not want to do that again. So I can take questions too if anyone has it. And Melanie.
Was there a question? Gwen?
I have just two questions. Just, in dedicating funds for a part-time position, in speaking with residents, the first thing that pops to my mind that they're going to be interested in is the residents' return on investment. Not to sound crass, I understand that this is critically important for our environment, but people are going to want to know what the return is on this investment for them. Like, can we just plant $20,000 worth of trees? I mean, so I know that it's deeper than that. So I just want to give you a chance to speak to what that return would be.
Sure. Well, I'm going to give an example and then a hopeful example after that. So right now, through our CDBG January, because I don't think everyone's aware of the scope and scale of what's offered for that, and it makes significant reductions in low-income households' utility costs. The key word there is low-income households. We can only benefit in energy efficiency improvements in that. With this position, there are many types of incentives that can be structured to target all households. So for example, we run a revolving loan fund program, as you know, for housing and economic development. Well, there actually can be a green revolving loan fund where people can borrow money deferred to do weatherization and energy efficiency improvements in their home that they normally wouldn't do. And that can be reduced over time to be a grant if they actually continue to live in that home. That will now be coupled with many of the federal tax incentives that are going to be available through some of the new legislation that's passed at the national level. So we need somebody that can structure those programs. I can help, but it is a completely significant investment of time to get those programs structured, financed, make sure we're following all the rules, and then also help residents through that process. We do it with CAC as our partner. Without having a partner and doing it for all households outside of those programs, that would be a tall order to add on to the order that the community development staff's already managing. So that's just one example that I know that's a program we definitely want. And I do think that homeowners would be interested if we can incentivize them getting a better furnace that reduces their electric bill and reduces emissions. Those are the types of programming and incentives that I think people can buy into if we can structure it right and have somebody manage that for them.
Okay. And so just, I guess, speaking specifically about our low-income homeowners and residents, this is something that can benefit them. This isn't just...
Oh, it would be they would be coupled with the programs that we already fund through the federal and state funding programs that I said that we already do, and they can expand on it. So for example, we can do furnace replacement and hot water tank replacement with HUD. We partner with weatherization with CAC, but that has a lower level. So so some people can replace a furnace and a hot water tank, but maybe their income is a little too high for the state's weatherization program for insulation, for example, or a new roof. Well, now maybe those people that would benefit from all of those programs, I can assist by saying, well, we're going to get you through this federal one here, and then weatherization you don't qualify for with CAC, but we can help you with this program that we're running here. The person would also be seeking grants which is going to be available for everything from EV charging stations, which we've already applied for out of the Community Development Department, to these types of initiatives for weatherization. I just got an email yesterday about one that's going to be coming out of the state of Ohio. So you're talking about a whole new focus and intent in the public sector that wasn't here even 5 years ago, based on the changes climate change is causing, whether it be Hurricane Ian and the things. It's more costly, it's higher. So it's here, we need to deal with it. So we need a staff person that can guide us through that process. And I was so grateful when this shared idea came up from Dave, because, you know, we're seeing these great programs going to be offered to our residents, but I kept saying to him, like, Patty and I can't manage these. We don't have the time. So that's what this part-time position will do. And obviously, the university is a huge portion of our community. So partnering with Melanie, who has been nothing but professional and knows her, she knows climate stuff. I don't. I'm like a pretend. She she really knows it and does it, and she's been doing it at the university. So they just finished a sustainability plan. I'm not going to explain the difference of that from a CAP, but let me just tell you, the two of us will be able to now work together on initiatives, and this person that is going to be a shared employee will it'll basically reduce emissions, but also incentivize it for residents. So, yeah.
And if I could even jump in too, we're not insensitive to that concern. So part of what we're doing here is starting with a part-time commitment that really is 1 year renewable. In other words, if after 6, 9, 12 months, everybody feels like, well, that didn't work or that's not being used, that's the end of it. So we don't have to, in other words, we're giving ourselves options so that we're not over-investing in the front end for something that we don't know for sure. I have a feeling it's going to be one of those that just builds on its own, and it won't be long before we're back saying, well, we need to make that full-time just for the city, and you know they're going to add more staff up there. Everything seems to be trending in that direction. So, and just ask Heidi. I mean, she's got lots of ideas, and I always get this guilt where she says, hey, can we do solar array panels like Kent State's doing, you know, and can we do this, can we do that? Can we partner with Portage County's program for the solar? You know, none of those things just happen. It takes a ton of facilitation, coordination, grant writing, all the connections that have to be built. So for us, this is a start in that arena.
The time investment, and it really is technical, not just technical in the science that they're researching, but also in the grant fundings, because I've been looking at them, because the grants will be coming, they'll be fine. I'm not saying everything's going to be paid for grants. We're going to have to make decisions here as a city, too. Are we going to incentivize, you know, somehow utility usage and things like that? Those are all discussions that need to be had, but we need somebody that's structuring and looking at those plans and is also diving into those regulations to figure out how we can get that program from concept to implementation to success.
Further questions? I have one. Job description, is that going to be 50-50 Kent State, 50-50 us, or what?
Yeah.
I'm going to let Melanie take this because it is technically housed under Kent State, so it's going to follow their kind of protocol.
Okay, it's just a question ought to be answered.
Yeah, we have, I think it was in your packet, was it not?
Yes.
I think we included the job description in the packet.
Okay.
Right, but that's correct. It's the person would actually be an employee of Kent State University. Half of their time would be for the city of Kent.
Okay, so we're paying 28 and you're paying 28.
That sounds right. I don't remember the number, but yeah, that sounds right.
I think theirs is actually a little higher just because it's their employee. But we'll, yeah, I mean, yeah, that's fine.
And what about benefits?
They're a Kent State employee, so they have Kent State University's benefits.
All right, good. Yeah. Heidi?
Yeah, while you're up here.
Sure.
Yeah, the one thing I wrote on this piece of paper when I read this was, what about Melanie? And so Kent State is seeing the value of having a second individual that is in some ways charged with getting things off the ground and doing this. So.
Absolutely. I mean, the Office of Sustainability is pretty small. I'm full-time, and then we do have a part-time person who's our outreach and recycling coordinator. So this will give us another half-time person. We always have more that we want to do than we actually have the capacity to do. We partner with people all over the university, all departments, people on and off campus. We partner with the city. So we're really trying to make the most of the time that we put into it. I think this shared position is really going to help. The city of Kent, Kent State University and the City of Kent, we're both working on climate action plans. Our consultants are going to talk to each other, you know, so that this will all coordinate and work nicely together. But we're all going to come out of this with a lot of action items, and a lot of them are going to be similar or the same, or exactly the same, right? So to have a shared person who can work on outreach and education about these things, who's working both on campus and in the community, I mean, that will just be more economical, I guess, than two different people trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, and there are a lot of students who live off campus, so. in the
Absolutely,
community.
yeah. Yes.
And faculty and staff and.
Yeah, there are obviously a lot of connections. Yes.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Anybody from the audience have questions, comment on this? Back to council. Heidi?
I would like to move to authorize this with the emergency.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Gwen. Is there discussion from Heidi?
I just think it's fabulous. It's like so prescient that we're doing this ahead of this study rather than scrambling once, we get overwhelmed with all these things that we should be doing or could be doing. And we're already putting in place that kind of implementation system, part of it. I can't put everything on one person, but I really am very grateful that our staff and our university have come forward with this, and I think this is going to be great for our region. I just wish that we could do a climate action plan for all of Portage County, but we'll start with where we are.
Discussion, Gwen, you second the motion?
I did. Initially I was a little bit skeptical about the position. I wasn't 100% certain its direct impact, the benefit for our residents, particularly our low-income residents. But from what I'm hearing from Bridget, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity there. And it's a growing field that I think there's going to be more and more opportunities. So I think it's going to, this investment now, dipping our toe, as it were, since it's shared like that, I think is a great step in the direction of securing, our low-income residents so that they can get the assistance they need, and also addressing a really important part of what's happening on the globe right now. So, thank you.
Robin?
Yeah, I wanted to, and I'll kind of use the word that Heidi used, which is the prescience of the situation. It is just so outstanding that our university kind of and the city are melding, seeing things in the same way, and identifying goals and objectives that are kind of symbiotic, that we can really come together on that's going to make a tremendous difference down the road. And I want to commend the university for being willing to work on not just this, but other categories and aspects that we are having to deal with as a community. And so I wholeheartedly support what we're doing here. Bridget and Harrison, who's no longer here, these people working toward a tremendous end on this. So congratulations to all of us for seeing that and being able to move forward on it. It's going to be, I think, we'll be doing this in a full-time way shortly. So.
Further? All in favor of the motion, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That's all on the Committee of the Whole, Health and Public Safety. Mr. Amory.
Yes, we have a presentation for Medicare for All. Health Commissioner Seidel.
Okay. While you're setting up your laptop, I just want to thank everyone for designating this time to discuss Medicare for All. And I want to start with a quote by Gandhi who said, "It is health that is the real wealth and not pieces of gold and silver." And certainly that has been my experience as I continue to move through life. I agree with that statement more and more. Certainly good health is the foundation for us all to be productive, active members of society. Yet optimal health is elusive for many. Good health is not just a factor of the daily choices we make. Many, even those with good insurance, do not always have access to the care they need or can afford the medical care choices a diagnosis may present. Please understand that I'm not saying all people should have the exact same health status, but instead that social determinants must not be what holds individuals back from achieving their own personal best health. Medicare for All is a plan that addresses much of what is lacking in health care currently. Our senators and representatives need to know that there is local support for healthier communities. Most definitely, it is important to contact our legislators and let them know of our concerns one-to-one. But to amplify our goals for a healthy Kent, we need to join together with other cities who have already passed similar resolutions on Medicare for all. Having access to preventative and all realms of health care would lend itself to a healthier workforce, which would make for a stronger economy. If you're fortunate enough to have employer-provided health care, you still can understand that there are parameters set in place by that plan. What is in network and what is not in network can certainly influence your overall health. Personally, in the past other jobs I have held, I had the choice of a health care plan that had an annual $10,000 a year deductible. Myself and those of my families covered by that plan had minimal interaction with providers because even with the high cost of health care and procedures, it was not possible to meet that deductible. Every visit was out of pocket. Choice under these conditions was merely an illusion. I just want to say before I turn the podium over to Michael and to Max that I want to share a preventative measure that the health department is going to offer. We're going to have a flu vaccine clinic here at the fire department on October the 19th from 11 to 1 p.m. I just want to say that because the next city council meeting will be passed by the time that happens. So please look for your email, and we'll have both kinds of flu vaccine, high dose and standard. So please look for that email, and I'll turn it over to I'll turn it over to Max and Michael now. Thank you.
All right, hello members of the council once again. I wanted to thank you for providing the time for us to speak with the residents of Kent about something that as physicians we're very passionate about, which is health care. I also want to give a big shout out and thank you to Joan Seidel as well as the rest of the fantastic crew over at the health department because they've helped us a lot with this and without them it wouldn't have been possible. So big thank you there. So today we have quite a bit to cover, and we do want to leave time for Q&A at the end, so we're just going to hop right into it. So starting out, we're going to cover why we feel it's important for cities like Kent to be passing resolutions about Medicare for All. And then we're going to jump into what the bill actually entails, sort of the meat and potatoes of it, and what the vision of Medicare for All is. Then we'll pause for some Q&A and have an opportunity to address some myths or misconceptions that people may have about Medicare for All. So I just want to start out by highlighting that local government resolutions actually have a large and rich historical precedent for organizing a national effort in making federal legislative change. A lot of our laws that are at the federal level started at the local level, and part of the reason that these strategies are so effective is because while individual advocacy is very important and definitely something that we encourage, having a resolution passed by an organization is a strong statement of support from a group of people. So it hits harder in some cases, and there are news articles written about it, and these are conversation topics that politicians and people who are making policy can have about it. So it sort of highlights it. And I want to say we are also encouraging people to take individual advocacy efforts through letter writing drives to senators, other representatives. So we are addressing that too, but this is part of sort of a multi-pronged strategy to help this legislation move forward. So some examples of resolutions that started locally and moved up federally are listed here. The 17th Amendment, which is obviously part of our Constitution, was initially proposed at the local government level. It took 25 states passing resolutions on this topic for it to be addressed federally. And now that's ratified in our Constitution. Another example is the Nuclear Freeze Campaign, which was an advocacy effort that started as a large grassroots movement, and its goal was to de-escalate the hostilities during the Cold War. And this took time, but as the effort progressed, it did lead to ultimately de-escalation. And I want to point out, actually, in 1982, the government of Kent passed a resolution supporting this. So it is something that the Kent government has done before, and more recent examples, such as talking about racism as a public health crisis, are other examples that we would include there. Both the women's suffrage movement as well as the civil rights movement also started as a large grassroots effort that then went on to have federal implications. So what are we looking like in Ohio currently? At this time, 6 cities and counties in Ohio have passed resolutions in favor of Medicare for All, and those are indicated by the green pins on that map there. But many other resolution efforts are underway currently, and as you can see, Kent is one of those locations, and we hope to be the 7th organization at the state level to kind of just express that we are supportive of Medicare for All because it just makes sense, and it's something that will help not only our residents, but all residents in our great country. And going away from governmental organizations, I do just want to point out that many medical societies and other organizations have already expressed their support of Medicare for All. Some of those are seen on the right side of the slide there, and I want to point out that several state medical societies have actually passed resolutions supporting the current bills that are underway. And we are hoping to present a resolution to the Ohio State Medical Association in the coming months. So just kind of to see what we're looking at here is that there's already substantial support for this, and we're just hoping that in the next few months and years to come that this is going to be a continually growing effort. And just kind of the highlight there, we've zoomed out, and we can see this is the national picture. There are a lot of pins on that map of resolutions passed and underway. So we're hoping to become part of a chorus of voices that is just really calling for healthcare as a human right. So now I'm going to pass it off to Michael, and he's going to talk a bit about the specifics of what the bill covers.
All right, thank you. And next I'd like to talk about the vision and some of the benefits of Medicare for All. Before we actually get into it, here's an outline of the Senate bill. We had to cut our breakdown of the bill to save time, but we can answer any questions about the specific language in our Q&A. We have slides at the end in our PowerPoint to discuss those. At the last City Council meeting, we testified on several examples of our health insurance system failing people both financially and with their health. And we even heard additional points of view from members of the Council. So I feel like we're all in agreement that the health insurance system is broken. We understand there are a lot of perspectives on how to address these issues in our healthcare system. What we want to emphasize today is that a true Medicare for All system is the only way to carry our healthcare forward, because it is the only plan that satisfies each of these following criteria. For one, it expands Medicare to cover all medically necessary services, where other plans leave these essential services out to either be covered by private insurance or out-of-pocket expenses. And two, it actually eliminates out-of-pocket expenses with an exception to $200 for prescription drugs per year, while other plans will leave a lot more out-of-pocket expenses within Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance. And then three, it is truly universal, meaning everyone is granted coverage under this plan, and no one has to navigate a fractured, hyperinflated private health insurance market. And when we mentioned that Medicare for All covers all medically necessary services, these are what we're referring to. Quite literally, the only thing I can think of that's not covered on this plan would be purely cosmetic plastic surgery. And then there are also many economic upsides to single payer or Medicare for All, in that it is funded by a progressive tax system based on the ability to pay with a modest transaction tax on Wall Street, where fractions of a penny on the dollar go towards funding the program. And to clarify a little bit further, from a study in 2018 that did not include that Wall Street transaction tax, it estimated that the bottom 80% of income earners would save money under this plan, with the largest savings going to the middle class. And with the Wall Street transaction tax, we'd actually expect more savings across the board for all income brackets. And then next, the streamlined billing nature of this plan, that it's all single payer, through a Medicare for All system, that it would save immense administrative savings to the tune of $500 billion a year. And then it is important to note that in every other country that has a universal health care system, their federal governments are able to negotiate drug prices down. So they spend at least half than what we pay here on pharmaceuticals. And adopting this policy would finally enable the federal government to negotiate drug prices down for the citizens. Over here. To summarize the rollout of the Medicare for All plan, it is important to note that it includes a 4-year rollout plan. In these 4 years, all children and newborns would be enrolled into the program, and it would include a temporary Medicare buy-in and public option program. Medicare would be improved during these 4 years by offering coverage to dental, vision, and hearing services, which is not covered by Medicare right now, and people with disabilities that qualify for Medicare would be immediately enrolled without having to go through the mandatory 2-year waiting period. This policy would also provide 5 years of full financial restitution for workers in the health insurance system, because their jobs would most likely be lost with the inaction of this policy. And after the 4 years of the rollout, the full benefits of Medicare for All would take effect, which we have discussed previously. While I would prefer to have at least 3 hours to go through all of the benefits and the data that backs it up with Medicare for All, I'm really thankful to have a few minutes to talk about this in front of the council today. In the interest of time, I do want to just go to the next slide. Because we understand that there are a lot of common talking points made against Medicare for All that have the council, that some of the council members and members of the audience may have heard. And I'd argue that these talking points are either misinformed or made purely in bad faith to smear the policy. And if you'd like any more information about these topics, we can toggle to these slides in our discussion for the Q&A. But I'll yield the rest of my time and open up the topic of our resolution for discussion and Q&A. Thank you.
Just an interesting thought. Do you think that Medicare for All would have an impact on your pay as a physician?
Yes, we can actually go to that slide. Because that is a common myth that actually does get brought up a lot, and it's something that we've had to really educate our students on this issue as well, because that was obviously a concern of ours. But basically, you don't even have to take my word for it. You can take the word of the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan federal agency that basically works through every piece of legislation that comes through Congress that deals with budgeting, and they do basically a budget analysis and see how it would affect costs across the board. And what it estimated is that providers, including physicians, would increase their revenue by 5 to 9% under Medicare for All than if there was no reform on the topic. So we'd make more money practically. And some scholars even project that we'd get a larger boost in take-home pay than that, because there would be a lot less burden of physician time spending negotiating with insurance companies or in private practice hiring billing clerks. This just leads to a lot more people seeking health care, which increases our revenue over the course of the year.
So just the administrative costs are likely to reduce.
Yeah, and actually, do you want to go to the next slide or the previous slide then? This one with the hospitals. Yeah, and this is the one that we really want to point out in terms of the administrative cost. That's a really big burden, and this is one example of a hospital system, but in the Duke University hospital system, which consists of 3 hospitals, they have a total of 957 beds throughout their entire system, so they're only treating less than 1,000 patients at any given moment. And they employ 1,600 billing clerks because they have to deal with several different health insurance plans and health insurance networks. And that is where the biggest brunt of hospital and physician burden comes from, is just trying to navigate all the different scattered plans that are out there.
So, can I ask a question? Jack?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Roger, sorry.
Okay, no. So, play devil's advocate a little bit. What happens to those 1,600 employed clerks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is the part of the rollout plan that they would also be eligible for that 5 years of full financial pay. So, and part of that is it's fully encompassing. So if a person was nearing retirement, they would still get their retirement pay for the 3 years afterwards. So they'd get all of their lost wages and health benefits. Anything that was under their, agreement of their terms of employment, they would be eligible to receive funding for.
Or could find another job.
Yeah, and part of the bill that's outlined, and this is something that's more going to be designed if it were passed, but it does say in the language of the bill that they would get preferential hiring if there were opening of positions to help basically grow out the Medicare for All program a little bit. They would help them with jobs training as well and get them preferential hiring.
Gwen?
Do you have any information about potential economic benefits from a Medicare for All? Speaking like specifically small business owners that are self-insured, maybe where one spouse is working for benefits only and the other spouse is working at a business. Do you have any statistics on how that might actually boost the economy, having owner-operated entrepreneurial endeavors not have to worry so much about health insurance?
Yeah, we don't have any specific statistics on that. It's just more so the argument that we have is a lot of people that are either wanting to start a business but can't because they want to keep their employment for health insurance that they get through their provider or their employer. Helps on that front. But certainly, I think we could definitely send a follow-up email on that. But I'll pass it over to Max.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add, prior to medical school, I was working in a variety of part-time roles. And one of the limitations of part-time roles is you don't get health insurance in a lot of cases. So as a business owner, you're kind of put in a situation where you have to choose, do I want to have full-time employees who will become very adept at their job, and that's something more reliable that you can work with and more attractive for people that you're looking to hire. But under the current system, some business owners are forced to be in a position where they can only hire part-time employees. And that has some benefits in that you have decreased cost because you don't have to pay for their insurance, which if we had universal health care coverage, that would not be an issue. But the cost is it's much more difficult to maintain full-time employees. So I'd say that would be one potential benefit.
Further questions? John?
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns about this program, and a little bit of research. I was supposed to be getting a lot of information so I could ask the appropriate questions tonight from one of the hospital administrators. But I know Taiwan has socialized medicine and the single payer program, and they probably have the lowest administrative cost in the world. But as a consequence of that, it's bankrupted the government. So the one question, I have that as a concern. And the other one is, I'm on a CTV newsline from Canada all the time, and right now, the residents of Canada, who is much underpopulated compared to the United States, and they have much less dependency as compared to the United States, the people are protesting, wanting to privatize the medical system because the system they have now that's so great is not working for the majority of the people. And the delays to get treatment, service, and everything else, it's frustrating. I had a fellow working for me this week, and he says it took him almost a year to get an MRI. And so that's nothing that I want to happen to my neighbors or my children, and I don't know how this differs, I know that the private pay or the singular pay system is appealing to me, where everybody feeds into a computer, but I'm just not real sure on the rest of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I really appreciate your points that you brought up there. For one, oh yeah, I was actually going to think about bringing up the different countries, like the UK one. So it's important, I think, when we talk about measuring healthcare systems and their feasibility and their overall functioning to compare to countries that have a similar economic, GDP as our country. And when we look at studies that compare us to other OECD nations, like the ones on the screen there, we are ranked dead last in terms of healthcare functioning overall. So I do know, as like a global effort, there's a lot of countries that are under-resourced that are moving towards universal healthcare systems to help the citizens of their populations, but it's not a fair or it's like comparing apples and oranges for our healthcare system to theirs. If we want to have a healthcare system like the UK, where at least on the front up there, where they're like ranked in the top 1, 2, or 3. They have universal healthcare systems. So it's almost like to the point where you can start throwing out one country versus the other. And it's just something that we want to move forward through with that. And James, I don't know if you wanted to come up to address the second question.
Yeah. Hi. So I just wanted to respond just for a moment because
Name and address for the record.
Oh, sorry. I'm James Moore. I live at 345 North Manaway. But I hear a lot of concerns from people I talk to about our neighbors up north in Canada. So I definitely appreciate the concerns that you have from speaking with people. I would like to just insert a brief counterpoint, if I may, respectfully, which is that half of my family actually lives up in Toronto. And I have the unique access to someone that I'm very close to, my father, who grew up in Northeast Ohio and went to Kent State, and then eventually married a woman, moved off to a different country, whatever. But so he's had some comparative experiences, and we've had extensive conversations about it. And, you know, he makes a decent income up there, and so does his wife, and he loves it. And I think that's a kind of story that you don't often hear a lot because, you know, frankly, when it comes to healthcare, people are often focusing on, unfortunately, negative experiences they don't necessarily want to ruminate on. But, you know, he went to have his first child with my stepmother, and they went to the hospital. They were taken care of from A to Z, start to finish, you know, left without having a single conversation about billing, which is kind of a unique experience that Americans just don't have access to, that I think we should. Our citizens deserve the chance to actually experience full access to medical treatment without having this burden hanging over their head. And sometimes there are issues with, you know, scheduling. Wait lists are a thing that I hear often brought up, and that is a concern. But I'll say from my own personal experience, I had to be put on, not on a wait list, but basically deferred treatment because here in the United States, with a private health insurance plan, getting imaging is something insurance companies just don't like. It's usually a routine operating policy to basically have a blanket rejection for imaging requests of certain types, especially MRI and CT imaging because they're costly. And for me, and this is kind of personal, but it actually, because I had to get prior authorization for a CT scan on my abdomen that I needed to have done quickly while I was still symptomatic, actually led to the delayed diagnosis of a chronic condition that I'm now dealing with that, you know, isn't going to just go away. But when you have a private company who gets to just tell the doctors, no, you know, you can say your patient needs this, but we don't want to pay for it, so we're going to make you like play all these games for several weeks in a row. To me, that's morally reprehensible and not an experience that anyone should have to go through.
Well, I agree, and I've been very fortunate with the medical care my wife and my family have received, but I don't know which is worse, the insurance companies playing games with the doctors, or I don't know what the reason that there's delays in treatment in the North Country versus us. And then again, you know, I would love to have the
John, point of order. I mean, this is questions, not personal. I mean, that's personal. And
yeah, I know. And so, do you have any documentation or figures on how many people would be considered financially unable to pay for insurance versus, you know, maybe other places? Or
Yeah. So there's kind of like two different ways I want to address your question there, and one of them is actually kind of to push back on the data behind rationing care in the U.S. versus other countries. While in Canada versus the U.S., and this was provided in your handouts prior, I'm not sure if you have a copy of it now, but we have several other copies, and I'd love to have them out of my folder, so you're welcome to it. But for one of them, it talks about rationing in hospital inpatient days per capita. How long per year, for each year, does each person get to spend in a hospital day? And the U.S. and Canada are actually tied at 0.6. But when it comes to physician visits, preventative care, seeing a primary care physician, the U.S. has, for on average per person, has 4 doctor visits per year. And in Canada, that number jumps up to 6.8. So just in terms of actual data behind the statistic, well, because I know a lot of individual stories can kind of contort the issue or conflate it, the data shows that we here in the U.S. actually have a less access to our physicians than in Canada. And another reason for that, talking about rationing health care, and this is a line that I did not come up with but had heard and repeated over time, is in other countries, they ration health care on need. So like in James's condition there, when they knew you needed to get a CT scan immediately to do the scan while it's symptomatic, they prioritize that, whereas other elective procedures do get wait time down the line to make sure that we're taking care of all the patients that they need to in those other countries now. In the U.S., we ration health care based on cost. And there's study after study, poll after poll that says 25% to 52% of Americans, depending on whatever poll, say they've avoided care or delayed care due to costs. So that is kind of the ball game we're playing, is do we ration care based on need, so we make sure we provide need emergently to anyone who really needs it, and the preventative care can be pushed off down the line, or do we basically keep doing what we're doing and say the bottom tier of society just doesn't get to see the doctor and has their conditions exacerbate?
Yeah, I agree. That's not good.
Yeah,
I would ask the question back. When it's your situation, do you want to be told that your condition isn't as important, therefore you can wait 1 year for your MRI, or are you going to have this utopian thing? Well, it's all, but I'll suffer for the greater good of mankind.
Yeah, well, I understand that concern, especially from like a member of the public. I guess if that was a hypothetical thrown at me as a medical student, I'd be able to rationalize, okay, I know this is something that I can get tested down the line, and it's definitely not something along the lines of like, oh, you have to get an MRI in 2 years. It'll be in 6 months or 9 months. And in the U.S., that is a reality today, where if you want to see a hyper specialist, you still have to wait half a year or so, or even longer.
I disagree with that, but the fact of the matter is, we're a society, an on-demand society, where we want our bagels delivered the next day by Amazon. And when you're told that your back hurts and you can't get an MRI for a year, and then I would ask the next question, like, who are you going to call? I mean, at least you can contest with your insurance company now. You're going to call the government? Who are you going to call in the government to contest your case of why you should have a priority?
Well, actually, that's a good thing you brought that up, and I'm glad you brought that up, actually, is because under Medicare for All, one thing that we haven't ever really addressed on these meetings yet, I don't think, is the in-network status. Under Medicare for All, every single hospital, private practice, doctor's office is in-network. So if you go to one doctor's office and in their hospital system that they have overbooked appointments, and they say, like, we would love to get you in, but we have to wait till 7 months from now, you can go to UH and see what their wait times are. In our current system, that is not possible because we have in-network status that is very confusing to navigate. So you always rely on your one primary care physician.
But that denies, that doesn't, I hear your point, and I don't want to get contentious, but it doesn't acknowledge the fact that who are you going to call when you have a problem? I mean, it's the government, right? It's an organization that has a 20% approval rating, and you're asking those people to run a medical system.
Okay. Well, I mean,
I'll just chime in on that. So obviously, this is like a very important issue, and thank you for asking these questions. But these problems are not absent in our current system, and we are making adjustments to try to address these problems. So there are specific positions that have been very recent developments in the past few decades in hospital systems where we have people who are made with the a position is made so that they can specifically advocate for issues like that. So you're assigned like a person, there are medical organizations known as accountable care organizations where they have their main function is to make sure that all their patients are getting these needs addressed. So it is definitely a valid critique that we do not want to be having people waiting long periods for this, but it's not necessarily a flaw with a general insurance reimbursement model like a single payer one would be, but a separate issue that is also being addressed by healthcare providers and the healthcare industry in general. So it's definitely related, but it's something that's also being approached with other avenues other than solely insurance. So having those patient advocates employed by hospitals is something that could help with that.
And I mean, sorry to like double up with a response here. I think there might have been a misconception here with when we talk about single payer or Medicare for all, it is just a public health insurance system. All of the health care is still managed by your doctor, still managed by the hospitals, so the government's never going to come in. They're not the ones saying, hey, on wait times, you, this one person in Ohio, you have to wait. It's not the government that's controlling healthcare decisions, and that's why we're actually pushing for it. Is because we think people that have medical licenses.
But the government is paying the doctors, and you're saying the doctors still control the situation. I think you're wrong. I think the system needs fixing, and there's ways to go about it. But I don't think here's the time to get back. I don't want to get back and forth. I think you guys have done a great job with your presentation. You're obviously very knowledgeable on it. I think the facts are contentious, and there's opinion and there's differing opinions on how the data is interpreted. And I think we should work towards a way to improve the system that we have, but jumping to Medicare for all is not going to be the solution, in my opinion.
Gotcha.
Robin?
Yeah, I think the issue that you're pushing, and correct me, this is a question, is how do we expand the possibilities of health care to the masses, so that more people are engaged in the process. What Garrett relates to, the cost issue, and the ability for those who already have to be able to then reach out and ensure that their care is taken care of and their issues are addressed, as opposed to your more general concept of the general populace and people who are currently outside of the system. How do we bring them in? How that can actually enable business, because it kind of reduces the cost factors on them, from what I can interpret. I see this all the time from I've heard that from businesses here in the States. We got to pick up the health care for all our people. It makes us less competitive in the world market. There are a lot of aspects, and Garrett, to your point, there are downsides, and there are downsides in everything we do. But the reality is right now what these young men and ladies are trying to accomplish is so that we lift ourselves up a bit, so we're able to reach out and assist those who right now are outside the system that are costing us a lot of money when they're not taken care of in a timely manner, because they're not going in. They don't have anybody to advocate for them. Nice, you can advocate for yourself. You've got the resources. Other people out there cannot. So my hope is that people will always be looking at the underbelly of this situation. And you and John is tremendous because you're very knowledgeable, and you guys deal with this on a basis that a lot of things you say are on target. We're not, I think a lot of us sitting around here already understand that there are challenges But this is a better approach to dealing with the issue of the masses of people who are currently outside of the system. They're trying to create an ability to pull more of them in. There will be a benefit there. And we have to start looking at this thing as us against them and start looking at us all in it together. That's what I believe they're pushing. And that's my hope that we can support that.
Thanks, Ron. Further? Okay. I don't know what.
Questions from the audience?
Oh, questions from the audience, comments? Back to council.
I think one of the points that got overlooked.
We need your name and address, and
you got to go to the
you have to go to the podium. Sorry. Name and address, please.
Yeah, Jeff Massey. I live in Metro, Ohio. So, it's my son.
Oh.
I think the point that got maybe overlooked here when you're talking about, it's really about eliminating the waste. A big component of it is eliminating the unnecessary waste in the healthcare system that would free up the doctors to be able to see more patients and free up the capacity in the MRI machines so that they can treat more patients. And I think that was one of the pieces that got sort of overlooked in that.
Thank you. Anybody else from the audience? Okay, I says to direct staff.
I would
But-
like to make a motion. if
Okay.
I could. I'd like to make a motion that we pass a resolution to support Medicare for all.
Second.
Okay. Comments, Gwen?
I'm firsthand live day to day as self-insured. It's broken beyond measure. So you're speaking to the choir a little bit. I live it every day. It's my one of my most expensive bills as a small business owner, and that doesn't get me a whole lot. So anyway, I support this. I thought it was an excellent presentation. I learned a lot. I thought I knew a lot about what was going on, and I really learned a lot from it, and I appreciate it. I like this because I think it will perhaps make it a conversation and push it in our federal government in a way that they can see that residents care about it. If it doesn't end up exactly like this particular bill, but it will definitely push conversation and hopefully open some eyes to people who have federal health insurance from our federal government, that not everybody has that same insurance, and there are people who are suffering. So, thank you.
Heidi?
Well, I support this, and I agree with Gwen that, we have to have a national conversation. We did have one a number of years ago. It resulted in some improvements, tinkering around the edges, but it's really not, we're not there yet. And I find it very disturbing that we pay some of the most for health care and have the worst outcomes. That has got to be fixed. And prevention is one of the keys to that, and access to preventive services, to basic services that people tend to ration because it costs too much and it's going to eat into their deductible, and I could speak for that myself because I do that. Also, this is really hurting our healthcare industry in a lot of ways. I know that for working with behavioral health care. In fact, companies such as mine are no longer accepting private insurance because of the vast amount of unpaid debt that arises from that. The people that have government-funded health care do not leave us with that kind of debt load, and that reduces access for people. So that's very important. There's so many reasons. The innovation. For a period of my life, I was able to have health care that was not connected to a job. And I started 2 businesses during that time. I mean, imagine the innovation that would happen in the United States if these 2 things were uncoupled. That was something that only just recently happened in the 20th century, where they were put together. So this is a relatively new development where we expect our employer to do this for us, and it's breaking employers. It's breaking employers. So I think the conversation needs to happen. I think it comes from the bottom up. You know, are we ready for that? Well, we'll see. But we need to say that this is something that's really important to us, that what's happening now cannot go on as is without continuing to really hurt many people, especially the middle class. And the working middle class is really at risk for problems. So I support it.
Further? John?
I'm not going to support the motion, and that's not saying that our healthcare system needs a lot of work, because it does. But I hate to make a decision based on information from one side. I was hoping to bring some people to the meeting on council meeting that are much more educated with the medical than I ever could think to be, that have a different outlook on Medicare for all. You know, all I know is, you know, Obamacare came out, and there were people that wouldn't buy the basic policy because they didn't want to reduce their cell phone service or their cable TV service and spend some of the little bit of money that they made. They weren't rich, but they didn't want to spend that for take care of their own health care. And I can also remember my wife going through cancer treatment and heart treatment on not a real big income, and we were paying, I think, $2,400 a month for health insurance, but we were glad to do it because she's still alive today. And, you know, that was a big chunk to bite too, but I still respect the system that we have, even with all of its flaws, because my wife is alive today because she got the best medical treatment when she needed it, where she needed it. And so I don't know. I think there's ways that we can change what we have, improve upon it, which it does need done. And I don't think I could vote for something without hearing both sides of the story. So.
Garrett?
I'm going to vote against the measure also. I think it should be called mediocrity for all, because eventually that's what's going to happen. Is I think you know, we're asking our elected officials in Washington who don't have the same medical system that we have. They have their own separate one. We're asking them to develop a system, and they can't do their existing job. The bureaucracy that's going to be created by having a whole nother department within the government, again, goes back to just larger and larger government and larger costs to all of us. And you can talk from everyone down from the lower class to the upper class are going to wind up paying more for the health care to subsidize and pay for that for a Medicare for all department. And there's never been a government organization that's ever decreased in size. I think you stifle innovation. You reduce the incentive for new drugs and treatments. You can't tell me innovation that's come out of the government. It comes out of a capitalistic society where money flows to where it's most profitable. And when you're letting the government decide what drugs can be researched, what money can be spent on research, you're ultimately doing a disservice to people that need not only the orphan drugs, but other drugs that can become available. You look at hepatitis. That was $60,000 a treatment, I believe it was at the time, and now it's basically cured hepatitis, and the cost has come significantly down. And that's what happens with all these drugs. You have innovation. The companies are allowed to make money for their innovation and the money that they put into the research and development of these products, and they get a patent for so long, and then before you know it, you have the generic equivalent for that. So I just think when you're asking the government to solve your problems, and there are problems, I'm not going to disagree, and I think that is not the answer to our solutions. And I would just, so I'm going to vote against it, but I would say again, it was a very well done presentation. Thank you for taking the time. I do appreciate what you had to say. I don't agree with everything, but I appreciate you taking the time.
Robin?
Yeah, what it boils down to me on is a right and a privilege. Whether or not people have should have the right to health care in this country for all of its people or for some, those people who have the ability to access it, having had to deal with, this is a great country. I go to dialysis 3 times a week. I would not be able to do that if it wasn't for the largesse of the people of this country in a system which picks me up every other day because it cares about the masses and not individuals. There are divots in the system for sure, but when we talk about innovation, this country will find ways to, if the system is in place, we will find ways to deal with those divots. We will find ways to deal with the deficiencies. But with people continually on the outside, it's not fair, it's not right, and it's not American. America is about uplift. It's about the ability for us to reach out and pull people up with us. For those who have, we have to be willing to sacrifice sometimes. And I just believe this is a right, and this is a time to deal with that. That these young people are standing up, and they're finding a way for us to do that. There's no in the world I'm going to vote against this.
Further? Roger?
That's pretty good.
What's that?
Oh. You know, I come at this a little differently, being old. Part of the reason that, in my opinion, that we're in this position that we are, a lot of it has to do with the, let's just call it the ability for large groups of people to negotiate contracts in the public, starting in the astounded that we were at impasse, I guess, when I got to, at my first school district, and they just threw in health insurance as kind of a, you know, a little sweetening of the pot, and it would cost virtually nothing. But think about this for a minute. So if there were only 100 people and they're going to buy health insurance, and it's not going to drive the price up, but when you have, let's say, 25,000 teachers in a particular area and they're buying health insurance, it became from a throw-in in the 70s as being a non-financial item to, by the time my career ended, I was sitting on the other side of the table negotiating with teachers. The main issue was the cost of health insurance, because the cost of health insurance was borne on 2 different groups at the time. It was the teachers themselves out of pocket that they had to pay per month for their health insurance, and the school district that had to pay the health insurance. So part of the problem is public employees actually drove up the costs by their participation in the insurance, because the insurance industry, and I agree with you completely, the most innovative group of people in this country from 1970 to the 2000s were the insurance people, who all of a sudden had an aha moment. Gosh, if we can get 20,000 or 30,000 or 150,000 school teachers, right, to negotiate health insurance, they began to see the massive ability to make profit. And so what happened is there was the balance between actual health and actual profit got kind of skewed. And what's tragic about it is we have some of the greatest medical people, the greatest doctors, the greatest types of medical innovation in this country, but in the end, profit by the insurance companies drives who gets served and who doesn't. And so I don't know that I agree, Garrett, that government doesn't always do a good job. It's kind of like now, we're in the middle of a baseball, the end of the baseball season. You have some managers who have superstars in their teams who just got fired because they didn't win any games. So I think any program that comes up that's mismanaged, anything the government comes up with, or anything that the private sector comes up with that's mismanaged, is doomed to fail, and it's going to be, I won't use the term, it's inappropriate in a large group. But bottom line is the bottom line, if this does nothing else, it sends a message that those of us who are fortunate, I'm blessed. I have, on Medicare, and I have a supplemental policy, I have the whole 9 yards. Even I have to wait for services, which is amazing to me. So I say, wait a minute, I pay all this money. But on the other side of the coin, we are the people who need to speak up and say there's something wrong with the system. And it's not because we're not being served. There's something wrong with the system because we have, and I'm a capitalist at heart, and I understand insurance companies want to make money. But when insurance companies are making the decisions about my health and the decisions on what I need for my health, there is a problem. So I don't know that anything will happen with this Medicare for all, but nothing else. We need to send a message that we're not happy with it. So unless everyone who's opposed to Medicare for all is willing to sign a petition, and say, we're not happy with how the medical thing's working, then I think we got to get their attention some other way. So that's my perspective on it. So I'm going to vote for it. Not knowing or not knowing what's going to come of it. I think it's the right thing to do to send a message that we're tired of the insurance companies and their excessive profits over the cost of, medicine.
Washington.
Okay. We have a motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yes, it for Health and Public Safety. Moving on to Land Use Committee.
Well, this isn't as exciting as Medicare for All, but I call to order the Land Use Committee, and we have to repeal and sequencing of the annexation legislation.
That was a nice setup for you, Hope.
Thank you.
I understand you were satisfied?
Okay.
You were satisfied?
Okay, I'll just go. Okay, I'm sorry I made the mistake last week.
Guys, hey, quiet, let's go.
Oh, sorry.
It's going to be a long night yet.
I apologize. The annexation ordinance that you passed at September's meeting, it was passed in the wrong order. It should really be passed in November. So what I would like for you to do is make two motions here, if you agree, and that is, one is to repeal the ordinance 2022-98 in October, and then we will bring back the ordinance or resolution that should have been passed, and that was the resolution accepting the acreage for the annexation. That's the first ordinance. And what we did is we actually passed the piece of legislation that would have sent the petitions to the County Board of Commissioners. So we did them out of order.
Okay, questions from council? Mr. De Leon.
No, I don't have any questions.
Anybody else? Questions from the audience?
I was just going to make a motion.
Somebody want to make a motion to repeal 2298?
So moved.
So moved, yes. I was going to do that when you were talking.
Thank you.
Questions? Comments on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion passes.
Next motion?
And then we need a motion to do what Hope said for the next
A
one.
resolution accepting the acreage into the city.
So moved.
Second.
Person seconded. Comments on the motion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. Motion passes.
Thank you.
And that,
Okay, streets and sidewalks, Mr. Sidoti.
Yes, we got Mr. Bowling coming up to talk about Hudson Road resurfacing.
Hurry up, I got to go.
Good evening. We were contacted about 6 weeks ago from the Portage County Engineer's Office
And Franklin Township would like to do a joint project to widen and resurface Hudson Road, and they would be submitting to OPWC for a grant, so we're requesting your approval to jointly submit to OPWC with the township and execute a cooperative agreement if successful.
Yes, Heidi.
Yeah, big question. I saw bike lanes. Do they take you all the way up to the bike trail head?
It's a dirt road when I looked up there.
It would go from McKinney to Johnson Road.
Isn't it on Judson Road?
What's that?
Okay, this phase.
This phase.
But we still haven't intention to.
My understanding that the Franklin Township is doing, this is Phase 5, the last of the phases. They started from the north, working south.
They're working our way down to us.
Yes.
We're working our way. Yes. That's a very dangerous stretch for bicyclists.
Exactly.
Very good.
Other questions from council? Seeing no questions from council, anyone in the audience want to speak to this? No? Back to council?
Approve with emergency.
Second.
Any comments? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Okay, item number 2. Isn't this kind of a annual thing, or semi-annual? Or
Yes, something like that.
Yeah,
So
something like
this is just
that.
a renewal for them to perform our bridge inspection services, which they started doing that in 2014.
No. Any questions for Jim on ODOT contract? Seeing none from council, anyone in the audience? Back to council.
Move to approve with emergency.
Second.
Any comments? Nope. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome. Where's the mayor? He left it. Jack, you're in charge.
Oh, that's right. The mayor's not here.
Rhonda.
Finance Committee, Chair Mr. De Leon.
See Rhonda standing there.
Ah, there she is.
She's ready to go.
I'd like to request the council pass the amendment that I submitted to the city manager on September 27th, the memo you have in your packet.
Questions from council? Anybody in the audience? Back to council.
Move to authorize.
Second.
With emergency, I guess. It's already happens naturally,
Yep.
right?
Discussion? All those in favor? What's that?
Yeah.
It's automatic.
Automatic.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
There we go.